My husband is dead. I'm missing my right arm. I feel like I'm just missing my life. I don't know what to do.
Miriam gets home. It looked like the house had been ransacked.
She sees Alan laying on the kitchen floor.
He was shot right in the back of the head.
62-year-old Alan Helmick dead.
Here in this parking lot, less than 2 months before Alan was murdered, there was an earlier attempt on his life.
Somebody tried to torch our car. So the car actually got torched.
We found a vehicle that had a wick in its gas tank and had been set on fire.
Never seen anything like that before.
We didn't know if this person could come back.
Miriam became convinced she was being watched.
She thought somebody was trying to come into the house, and she was scared for her life.
2 weeks after Alan's murder, Miriam finds a dramatic discovery under her doormat.
And she goes, what should I do? What should I do? And I said, you call the police and you get away from them.
There's a card inside that says, Alan's first, you're next. Run, run, run.
Out here in the western Colorado countryside, the wide open spaces can stretch for miles. In a place this remote, it might seem unlikely that two lonely souls might find each other and a second chance at love. But that's exactly what happened here, until one warm summer day when the peace of this place was shattered by unimaginable violence.
911, what do you have to cover emergency?
My husband is
You what?
dead. My husband is dead.
This was a big story that shocked a small town.
There's blood everywhere. He has blood under his head.
There was a scare in the community, you know, that something like that could happen. We don't have a lot of crime here.
No. What's got to do this?
Murders just didn't really happen there, especially murders with so many twists, and especially to a well-respected businessman that everybody really loved.
Alan Helmick was a fixture in this community, a man who dedicated his life to helping others achieve their dreams, getting small businesses off the ground and families into their first homes. In fact, he was known as the broker of Main Street.
Alan Helmick was a prominent businessman. He had a mortgage business. Everybody respected him. He was firm, but he was very friendly.
An avid outdoorsman, Alan took advantage of all western Colorado had to offer.
The western slope is just gorgeous. It really is where the west meets a bit of suburbia. And in Whitewater, people had these sprawling homes, very affluent, very safe.
How would you describe this town of Grand Junction?
We pride ourselves on our outdoor activities, our beaches, our wine industry. Great for families.
Alan had grown up in the nearby town of Delta and settled into Grand Junction to raise a family. What was Alan Helmick like?
You know, he was a good guy. He was a great athlete.
Bob Cacchetti was Alan's friend and longtime accountant. Good instincts?
Yeah. Oh, he was a risk taker. He was a gambler. We went to Vegas once, and I think by the time we checked in the hotel, he was borrowing money. He recovered, you know.
He was a good business person. He took a lot of chances, but it seemed to more than not played out and worked well for him.
And definitely not one to shy away from attention.
One time we were in Mexico. A bunch of us were down there on a fishing trip, and the mariachi band came around the restaurant. Alan handed him a few dollars and asked for the trumpet from one of them, and he joined him on the trumpet. And he was really good. It was like, wow, where'd that come from?
So it didn't surprise those who knew Alan that after his first wife unexpectedly passed away, he wanted to meet new people. So he decided to try something different, dance classes. And his instructor is this woman, Miriam Giles.
Oh, yeah, he came in one time, and we were doing something, and he says, yeah, I just love dancing.
Miriam was a very good dancer, a good instructor. She had me dancing, which was a miracle.
Alan, I believe, kind of had that love at first sight feeling and really wanted to pursue Miriam, and did so on the dance floor.
Miriam was 10 years his junior, but Alan didn't let that discourage him. He described meeting Miriam in an interview he did shortly before he died.
She didn't want to date me, but I persisted. She's my dance instructor, so I could go on a cruise and not be club-footed. We ended up becoming pretty compatible.
Alan seemed reborn. He was so very happy.
They ended up falling madly in love and got married within 2 years of knowing each other.
They would talk about how they would go out on their boats late at night to watch the sunsets together, have an evening cocktail, and just how they felt like they had just found a true partner late in life. It was just like a little fairy tale come true.
It's June 10th, 2008. Typical, beautiful Tuesday morning in Whitewater. And Miriam leaves to go run some errands. Alan was going to get his car serviced, and then they were going to meet up for lunch.
She stopped to get cigarettes, stuff for her horse, even check on a prescription for him.
She went to City Market to pick up his prescription and found out that he hadn't dropped it off. So she called him, could not get a hold of him.
When Miriam gets to the Chinese restaurant, she calls Alan again to see if they're gonna meet, but Alan never shows.
Miriam, after 15 minutes, decides to leave and head home. Miriam gets home. It looked like the house had been ransacked.
At that point, she sees Alan laying on the kitchen floor on his back with blood under his head. She calls 911 immediately. She's sobbing. She's frantic.
It's all bloody.
He's all bloody?
Yeah.
Where's he bleeding from?
It looks like the back of his head. It looks like somebody's been through here.
We knew patrol had been dispatched out to what was reported as a robbery, and then we had a deceased person on scene.
Robin Martin is a detective who worked the case. When the first officers arrived on the scene, they find Miriam distraught and kneeling over her husband.
Alan was on the floor in the kitchen. It looked like he had been shot in the head, and we had a bullet casing next to his body. They did a very quick security sweep to make sure there wasn't a suspect still on scene.
There's no one in the house. As they conduct their sweep, deputies notice drawers pulled out in the kitchen and a trash can tipped over in Alan's office.
In the newsroom, we have police scanners, and we heard the call go out saying there was a robbery homicide out in Whitewater. I packed up my camera gear and went out there immediately. What I saw when I got out there was a scene that was taped off. Multiple officers going in and out of the house, conducting their investigation.
A lot of media attention?
Yes.
This was a big deal in that town, I guess.
It was. Very much so. And everybody wanted to know what was going on.
My wife and I were getting ready for bed. 10 o'clock news come on. The headline was, there has been a homicide in Whitewater.
The Mesa County Sheriff's Office is called out to this Whitewater home.
I kind of jokingly said to my wife, I says, oh no, I wonder if that's Alan. And lo and behold, it was Alan.
What they find is 62-year-old Alan Helmick dead, shot in the head.
It's Detective Work 101 that you start with the people closest to the victim. But in this case, Alan's wife, Miriam, was running those errands, expecting to meet Alan for lunch. She even had the voicemails to prove it.
Okay, Alan, this isn't funny anymore. I've been sitting here in front of the Chinese place for 15 minutes, so would you call me?
Things did not add up. Everybody knew him. Everybody loved him. Who would do such a thing?
The Mesa County Sheriff's Office is called out to this Whitewater home on a report of a possible robbery. What they find is 62-year-old Alan Helmick dead, shot in the head.
After finding her husband Alan dead in a pool of blood on the floor of their Whitewater, Colorado home, Miriam Helmick is brought in for an interview with the Mesa County Sheriff's Office.
Thank you for coming down and helping us get to the bottom of this. We appreciate it. It's Miriam, right?
Investigators are trying to solve this murder. The first 24 to 48 hours are critical, and she is the first person you want to talk to.
Miriam was at our office. As we do with all, what were you doing today? Can you go through your day for us?
I had some errands I needed to run today, so he was we would meet later, so he got in the shower and got dressed.
Okay, what time did you leave?
And what did she tell investigators about her whereabouts that morning?
She started listing off everywhere she had been. She told us that she was calling Alan several times, was getting his voicemail.
Hi, Alan. I just want to let you know I'm going to Walmart. If you're going to meet me for lunch, let's meet at the Chinese buffet. Love ya. Bye.
Then what happened?
I still hadn't heard from him. And then I went from there to Orchard, Mesa City Market to pick up his prescription.
Okay. What time is it now?
I probably got there about 10, around 10.
Hey, Alan. You need to turn your phone on. Question for you. When I pick up your prescription, they said that you hadn't been by yet. So are we still going to be able to meet for lunch? It's not like you to not call me, so give me a holler. Thanks. Bye.
And since he hadn't called me back, I thought he was caught up somewhere to me. So I left him a message and told him I was going home in case he decided to meet me there anyway.
Okay, Alan, this isn't funny anymore. I've been sitting here in front of the Chinese place for 15 minutes, and you're never late. So would you call me?
Miriam's entire morning is accounted for. She even offers up proof of where she's been.
I think I have all the receipts in my pocket.
She actually went from one end of the valley to the other end, and we were able to track her movements, not only by her receipts, but by her cell phone interacting with cell phone towers.
She was tested for gunshot residue?
Yes, she was tested for gunshot residue.
Her clothes were collected?
That's right.
They take those items to check them for any kind of gunshot residue or blood spatter that might indicate Miriam had something to do with this. And those results came back negative.
She's also caught on several surveillance cameras throughout the morning. Miriam seemingly has an airtight alibi. So naturally, investigators are anxious to ask her who she thinks may have wanted to harm Alan.
Did he have any enemies, any problems with any of his contracting work going on, any disputes? Would he share that with you if he did?
I think so. He shared a lot with me.
Miriam said Alan was generally well-liked, but detectives also knew he'd been a local mortgage broker. Could he have turned someone down? Maybe had a disgruntled former client or co-worker who was out for revenge.
He did not like lying or dishonesty. He would fire people for that, but that was respected.
And he had started his own business here decades earlier. Alan had married his high school sweetheart, Sharon, and had 4 children through 37 years together. But on New Year's Eve, 2003, she died of a sudden heart attack. How did that affect him?
Friends said that he was quite depressed and wasn't doing that well.
And soon afterward, he takes up dancing.
He was encouraged to try a new activity.
When Alan met Miriam, I know she had a policy of not dating her students, but Alan was pretty relentless.
Kieran Wilson was a local journalist in Grand Junction, Colorado, who covered this case. Just days after Alan's murder, she spoke to an emotional Miriam.
I met him teaching how to dance, and I didn't really like him while he grew on me. But he was such a gentleman, and he was so sweet, and just love him to death, you know.
Miriam had been dealt her own difficult hand in life, having faced not one but 2 unimaginable tragedies back in her home state of Florida. Chris Giles is Miriam's son. Grew up in Jacksonville, mom, dad, a sister. What was it like?
It was good. Typical kind of for family. You know, me and my sister were super close. Mom kind of led us to do our things, but was also there to kind of shepherd everything and help us through.
In 2000, Miriam and her first husband, Jack, were devastated when their eldest child, 23-year-old daughter Amy, died suddenly after an accidental overdose. How did the family cope with this, with her death?
We didn't really talk about it. After a while, things kind of started going downhill.
And Jack just, he kind of, he just could not live without his daughter. It just tore him apart.
And then 2 years after your sister dies, tragedy strikes again.
Yeah, my dad took his own life, and I woke up to the gunshot.
Miriam's husband, Jack, shot himself while he and Miriam were in bed.
Mom kind of runs out the door, and she's hysterical, just losing her mind, like a scream I've never heard before in my entire life.
Well, it was a dramatic change in your family, the loss of father.
Yeah, and you're trying to figure out how to deal with those things. You got to deal with the pain. You got to deal with the hurt.
She turned to dancing after all this.
Yeah, it was kind of her escape, where she kind of felt normal.
And then your mom decides to move to Colorado.
Yes.
And not long after is when Alan Helmick walked through the door of the dance studio where Miriam worked.
Everybody's really happy for Alan. He seemed real happy. Yeah, another chance at love.
Everybody said that her and Alan were kind of a good team for dancing. They were a real couple.
So Alan and Miriam decided to build a house together, and they chose the community of Whitewater. The house was set pretty far back from the road, and it was about a 40-acre property.
Your mom goes through all this, seemingly happy again, and all of a sudden, this happens.
911, what do you have to cover emergency?
My husband is dead.
How did you learn that Alan had died?
She called me. And told me that he'd been shot. Still kind of another shock to the system.
Another loss.
Yeah, another loss.
So far, investigators don't seem to have much to go on. But about an hour into that police interview, Miriam says something that would raise the eyebrows of any homicide detective.
In Delta. And somebody tried to torch our car.
So the car actually got torched in Delta?
Had Alan's killer made an earlier attempt on his life? After Alan Helmick is found murdered in his Whitewater, Colorado home, his wife Miriam is interviewed by investigators. And she tells them about a shocking incident that happened just 6 weeks earlier.
Somebody tried to torch our car. They took a stick or a big like restaurant skewer and put some kind of gauze on it and stuck it down in the gas tank and lit it.
Here in this parking lot, less than 2 months before he was murdered, there was an earlier attempt on Alan's life. Someone tried to set his car on fire. It looked like something straight out of a movie, but for the Helmicks, this brush with death was all too real.
Tell me about that incident. What happened that day with the car?
Well, Alan and Miriam had driven to Delta for the closing on their business. They were selling Alan's title company to a purchaser, and they had finished the transaction and had parked out front.
Collected a check?
And collected a check for over $100,000 for the sale of this business, and got in the car.
At that point, Miriam went in to use the restroom.
And while she's in the business, the car starts smoking.
Alan looked in the mirror and saw that the vehicle was on fire. He got out of the vehicle, went to the back of the car, and a wick was in the gas tank.
When Miriam comes out, she hears that Alan's screaming at her to bring her to get a fire extinguisher, that the car is on fire.
Upon arrival, we found a vehicle that had a wick in its gas tank and had been set on fire.
You ever seen anything like that before?
No, I had not seen anything like that.
It was pretty obvious someone had tried to start that fire.
Correct.
So if someone was trying to set the car on fire, it didn't quite work.
Correct. The fumes did not ignite, fortunately.
Were they able to glean anything else from the crime scene?
No security cameras from the surrounding businesses, no video footage whatsoever of what had transpired.
The police both questioned Miriam and Alan after the car incident.
You have no idea who would do this to you or Alan?
No, not at all. I mean, it's just weird. I don't know. We've been hashing it over last night. We can't figure it out.
Alan didn't have a lot of enemies, and so who would want to kill Alan in that kind of way by blowing up his car? That was a real mystery.
Do you know anyone that would have a problem with you?
I do not. Over the years, active as I was in business in this area, there's going to be some unhappy people because I turn people down on loans from time to time. But I think I was well respected in the savings loan industry. There are two people that have had a problem with it.
Okay, who are those two people?
Alan mentions two bankers with whom he had prior dealings, but quickly downplays their potential involvement in the arson.
I can't imagine them being vindictive because they're too much exposed.
Right.
They did stupid things, but they're not stupid people.
Investigators will ultimately determine that those bankers are not involved, but they're exploring every avenue, even asking Alan if he thinks it's possible Miriam could have been responsible for the car fire.
Oh, God. No, I don't think that.
Not at all.
That would be terrible. No, why would you do that?
So during the interviews with officers, Alan and Miriam had mentioned that Miriam would not hurt Alan or harm him because Alan was worth more to her alive than if he were dead.
What would she gain if you died yesterday?
What he would get is a mess. She gets nothing that was created prior to the marriage.
Alan was convinced that it wasn't Miriam, and if the investigators in Delta had any suspicions of Miriam being involved in this, Alan was the first to defend her and say she wouldn't do this.
And besides, what reason would Miriam have for trying to kill Alan? He'd always gone out of his way to make her dreams come true with lavish gifts and gestures.
His goal in life was to make me happy, and he took care of me. His favorite saying was, have fun like hell. So anytime he knew I was going shopping or he gave me money or anything like that, he would say, have fun like hell.
Alan loved Miriam, and he was always happy to dote on her, buying her lavish gifts like her own dance studio and even a horse training business, always intent on making her lifelong dreams a reality.
I met Alan and Miriam Helmick at my farm because they wanted to buy some horses to start a horse breeding operation. It was always her passion to start riding, and Alan was just said, you know, I'm going to give this dream to you.
Horse training centers, it's extremely difficult way to make a living. Most of those never pay off. It's a labor of love.
You told him it was not a good idea to invest in this horse.
No, and I said, it's a good hobby, but it's too expensive.
And his desire to open up that dance studio came from where?
Oh, it had to be Miriam.
You had your concerns about him investing in these things.
Oh, I told him, I said, get your head up your ass.
Sounds like you really wanted to make Miriam happy.
I think so.
Alan was always very good with his finances, but with the horse business and the dance business, they were hemorrhaging money.
As investigators began digging into Alan's finances, they found that bad business decisions had left him in a serious financial hole. But were his money troubles enough of a reason for someone to want him dead? Or could the murder have been more personal?
Does Alan Jr. know where you guys live now?
Yes, he's been there.
He's my wayward kid because he's sort of a bum.
Investigators will soon learn about some long-standing Helmick family tension.
He said if he shows up when he's not announced, you call the cops.
1 week after his untimely death, Alan Helmick is laid to rest.
When we were at Alan's funeral, Miriam sat in a pew in the very front, of course. She was crying, looked real despondent. Alan's family, his daughters, were just heartbroken and devastated. Alan was a really good dad to those kids. He was like their rock, and hit them real hard.
What's it like around here without him, I guess?
Very quiet. I'm missing my right arm. I feel like I'm just missing my life. I don't know what to do.
In the days after Alan Helmick's murder, investigators had diligently chased down leads and conducted interviews with people in his orbit, but they hadn't announced any suspects. There was, however, one thing they were pretty sure of. This was not a robbery gone wrong. What stood out to you?
It was odd. You had property still in the house that was, you could assume, was of value that a normal burglar would take.
Like what?
Computers, phones, jewelry. The normal type of stuff you would expect somebody to steal.
There were drawers pulled out evenly. There was a trash can knocked over. There were drawers that were open that wouldn't hold valuables anyway.
And most of the drawers were open in the kitchen, right?
Correct. In the kitchen, throughout the house. It just did not sit right. It did not feel right. It was looking staged.
And Alan's autopsy confirmed that he probably had not walked in on anyone committing a burglary.
There was no indication that Alan had tried to fight off his attacker. It was very clear that he was caught by surprise as he was shot right in the back of the head.
Do you think Alan knew his attacker?
I don't know.
But there was someone in Alan's life that Miriam had told investigators he'd been wary of. At one point, Miriam starts pointing fingers at Alan's son, Alan Jr. What did she say about him?
Miriam talked about how Alan and Alan Jr. never got along, and that there was some falling out between the two of them and some animosity.
Tell me more about Alan Jr.
He's had run-ins with the law.
What was the relationship between Alan and Alan Jr. 3 to 4 months ago?
Same.
Same
It's
distance?
been that way for many years.
Okay, kind of
Very
stayed apart.
distant.
Okay.
There's some real animosity there.
Does Alan Jr. know where you guys live now?
Yes, he's been there.
And after that car fire 6 weeks earlier, Alan had also mentioned his strained relationship with his son to those investigators.
He's my wayward kid because he's sort of a bum. And you can't fix that by just handing him money.
Alan's personal issues with his son, coupled with the fact that he may have known his attacker, was enough for detectives to bring Alan Jr. in for an interview.
Come on in and have a seat. And I,
Right here?
yes, that's
All right.
fine.
He's the kind of guy that if he saw something that wasn't right, he would give you his 2 cents about it, and it would not be nice. It would be sharp.
He just told it as it is.
Yeah, it's sharp. Yeah, right out.
Sure.
My dad's like, you're out, you know,
Right.
you're I like you because you're doing this.
Alan Jr. goes on to say that his father had effectively cut him off financially.
You know, Dad wouldn't give me a dime.
Okay, did you ask?
No, I'm sure that I had back then, and they repeated, you know, hey, this is something you need to learn to take care of yourself.
When asked, Alan Jr. insists he would never hurt his father, and he had an alibi. He was working out of state at the time of the murder.
Where were you Tuesday? Because everybody's been asked that question. And
You know, I'm not an ignorant human being,
Right.
and I would be offended if you didn't ask those questions. In fact, I would be angry with you if you didn't ask them in that way. Would have been working on the computers. I would have been at the hostel on my computer.
In Seattle.
Alan Jr. was cleared as a suspect.
That's right. No evidence linking Alan Jr. to having anything to do with Alan's murder.
So investigators are back to square one.
That's right.
There were no suspects. We didn't know if this person could come back.
I never thought it would happen here or anything like that would ever happen here. It's just always quiet around here.
Are you scared that this person might come back?
I don't know. Yes and no. I don't want to leave because I'm closer to him here.
Had there been a murder in my home, would not want to stay there, especially not a few days after. But she said it was her home. She said she felt closer to him there.
But if Miriam says she felt safe enough to stay in her and Alan's home, that was about to change.
And then 2 weeks after Alan's murder, Miriam finds a dramatic discovery under her doormat at the house.
And she goes, what should I do? What should I do? And I said, you get off the phone and you call the police and you get away from there.
Was the killer now coming after Miriam?
Miriam Helmick came home last Tuesday to find her husband Alan shot and killed. Her quiet Whitewater neighborhood was turned upside down.
The baffling murder of businessman Alan Helmick had left a community desperate for answers. Detectives were taking a close look at everyone in Alan's life, even close friends like Ed Benson, who was brought in for an interview.
I've known Alan, I don't know, a long time.
So you're good friends, I could.
Well,
is it safe to say you're good friends, or
we're friends? I mean,
okay.
We're not. We're good friends.
So,
strange interviews with the sheriff's department, the investigator. You know, you go in and we're friends, but yet we were treated as like suspects.
Did you guys ever have any bad blood between you two or anything like that?
Not from my standpoint. Not at all. No.
Any enemies that you know of without Alan telling you, or any, said rumors that, Alan's not a good guy or anything like that?
Never.
Okay.
Never.
And there was that mysterious car fire just weeks earlier. Everyone wondering, could the two incidents be linked?
Take it all that they may be connected?
A good possibility. I'm just letting them figure that out. It was, it was a shock to us. But he never mentioned anything about anybody that would do something like that.
As days passed with no suspects in custody, Miriam became convinced she was being watched. She reported seeing a white pickup truck with a driver she didn't recognize circling the property, leaving her to wonder whether the same people who killed Alan were now coming after her.
I talked to Miriam almost on a daily basis, and in a lot of our conversations, she talked about that she thought somebody was trying to come into the house and she was scared for her life.
Miriam starts reporting that weird things have been happening around the house. She's saying that she will come home and a door that she knows she locked is unlocked.
She was finding lights on. She was finding medicine cabinet doors open that shouldn't be.
She saw one or more suspicious vehicles that she didn't know who was linked to them. And mind you, this is a very small area, only a handful of homes out there. And you recognize most of the vehicles that are driving in and out of the area.
But the strange happenings at the home weren't the only thing worrying Miriam. With Alan, the sole breadwinner, gone, there wasn't any money coming in. During her police interview, Miriam had explained to investigators that they had a prenup.
She really didn't have anything without him. She didn't stand to gain a lot.
I did not have any legal claim to anything that he owned.
Okay.
It was pretty cut and dried.
Miriam's financial situation was fairly dire. In fact, she started selling off some of the property they had together.
She said she had no money, all the money was in Alan's name. So I said, well, let me buy the horses back, I'll pay your debt off to the other trainer. That way it'll give you some money for what you need to live on.
And then, as Miriam is struggling to stay financially afloat, an ominous message shows up on her doorstep.
She was with her friend Penny. They had just gotten back from shopping. She goes up to her front door and she sees an envelope sticking out from under the mat. And when she opens that envelope, there's a card inside that says, "Alan's first, you're next. Run, run, run."
She collapses to the ground, becomes very distraught.
Marion calls me and she's frantic. And she goes, "What should I do?" And I said, "Well, you need to hang up the phone and call the police and get out of there." I said, "Because somebody could be there trying to hurt you."
The greeting card is turned over by Miriam to her lawyer, who then notifies the police.
I was given a copy of the card. It said, "To the grieving widow," in block letters. On the front is a picture of a middle-aged female. And it said, "Insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result." And then inside, Alan spelled A-L-L-E-N.
Misspelled.
Misspelled. Your was also Y-O-U-R. A grammatical thing, okay.
Whoever left it there had cut out the barcode, seemingly in an effort to obfuscate anybody tracing that card, where it was purchased, who purchased it, that sort of thing.
It looks like Miriam might be the next target.
Maybe there is somebody out there who really wants to kill Miriam as well.
After Miriam received the threatening card, she left and she went back to Florida, Jacksonville, Florida, where she's from. She moved in with her son, Chris.
How was she coping?
Oh, it was not good. You know, there was some brokenness there. I just knew that she was in a bad place. I was trying to help her through that stuff.
What did you make of that?
I think that's not that abnormal. She didn't have a lot to her name, so she needed to figure out how to live without Alan.
Back in Colorado, that bizarre greeting card gives police something they have been desperately searching for: a solid lead.
I had actually seen this card before.
Just coincidentally, you had seen the card?
It's kind of a unique front on a card.
It's at this city market that investigators finally get the break they've been waiting for. The person who bought that card with the threatening message from Miriam is caught on surveillance tape here. And just who that person is will take everyone by surprise.
You see clear as day.
Then a bombshell discovery from decades earlier.
The piece of evidence that was really the smoking gun, almost literally, was recovered from that lawn in Delta.
What investigators find buried here will crack this case wide open.
What we had was a man who had led a good life and he ended up murdered.
I saw Alan on the floor. He was cold and gray.
People were in disbelief. People were scared.
I held his hand for a few minutes and tried to make some sense of it all.
Miriam comes home. There's a handwritten note, and it says, "To the grieving widow."
Alan's first, you're next. Run, run, run.
It looks like Miriam might be the next target.
The killer was now after her.
You want twists and turns? There's no shortage of that here.
I met Miriam on a dating site. She wrote, "Saw your profile and loved it."
She was moving on.
Even my girls were like, she's dating already?
She's trying to get on with her life in a new state. But another incident with a gun comes to the surface.
I heard the shot. Mom kind of runs out the door and she's hysterical, just screaming. Like a scream I've never heard before in my entire life.
Could what they find buried in this yard be the smoking gun?
On June 10th, 2008, 62-year-old respected businessman Alan Helmick was found dead in his home by his wife Miriam.
When we arrived, Alan was on the floor in the kitchen. He had been shot in the head and we had a bullet casing next to his body.
The place had been ransacked, but nothing seemed to have been taken.
They realized fairly quickly that this was a staged attempt to hide what really happened.
A tragic ending to what appeared to be a perfect second chance at love.
Both Alan and Miriam were widows. She was his dance instructor for ballroom dancing lessons.
I'm missing my right arm. I feel like I'm just missing my life. I don't know what to do.
Miriam told police she'd been running errands all morning and provided receipts to back up her alibi.
I went to Walmart.
Okay.
I needed to buy some shirts.
Police were at a loss as to who would want this well-liked businessman dead.
Alan had some enemies, but nobody was going to kill him.
And as investigators began to dig deeper, the story took a frightening turn.
Miriam comes home. There's a handwritten note, and it says, "To the grieving widow. Alan was first, you're next. Run, run, run."
It looks like Miriam might be the next target.
The real killer was now after her.
After Miriam received the threatening card, she went back to Florida, where she's from.
When Miriam came back to Florida, I was so surprised. I just couldn't believe it. She gave me a call, and you know, I got a lot to tell you, she says.
In Florida, Miriam turned to old friends for support, reconnecting with her former neighbor, Aline Lee.
Miriam didn't have any money. She said, "All I've got is just the clothes on my back. I have nothing." I said, "I can get you clothes. My girls are your size." I bought a gas card for her, and I gave her a bag of jewelry. I just felt bad for her.
While Miriam tries to restart her life in Florida, detectives in Colorado are continuing to work the case, trying to figure out where that threatening card she received came from.
They got in touch with the manufacturer of the card. He was able to tell them where these cards were sold.
I checked the Hallmark, I checked the Hobby Lobby. We finally get to the city markets. I contacted their loss prevention guy. They found 2 sales. One person paid in cash, didn't know who that person was. The other one was with a credit card. So we had a name, and then he found one more purchase. He called me and he's like, "I've got video."
That store uses VHS tapes?
That particular store was not as up to date as their others, and they did use VHS, and they used it over and over and over again. So by the time we got this tape, it was kind of delicate. It was her. She was wearing the same style of shirt that she had walked in with her interview. It was just a different color combination.
You see Miriam going first to the area where the cards are sold within the city market, and then to the cash register where she pays for it. Clear as day.
So now it appears that Miriam, the grieving widow, seemingly afraid for her own life, had actually sent that threatening card to herself. But when investigators confront her about this, she says she has an explanation.
What Miriam told them is that she felt like the police weren't paying enough attention to the case. They weren't doing much. And so she wanted to kind of jog that with this card.
That was probably not the best decision to be made. Not what I kind of would have done in the situation.
She felt she needed to do this.
She felt she needed to.
Did that greeting card incident change the way you and investigators approach the case?
What innocent person would do this? Obfuscate, complicate a murder investigation with this ruse?
But remember, when she was interviewed by investigators, Miriam said she had very little to gain from Alan's death.
We did a prenup. Okay. Everything his is his. Everything mine is mine. He has more than I do.
Okay.
With no clear motive in sight, the Mesa County Sheriff's Office turned their attention to Miriam's past, learning about that double tragedy she and her family suffered years earlier in Florida.
There was the sudden loss of her daughter, and then a shocking development with her first husband.
While Miriam and her first husband, Jack, were in bed, Jack shot himself in the head. Now you say, okay, she's had not one, but two husbands shot in the head.
Was there a common thread?
And they were both married to Miriam Helmick.
Police ruled it a suicide. There were some strange circumstances, though. Things like he used his right hand to pull the trigger. Jack was a lefty.
Investigators then start looking back at your father's death.
Yes. I woke up to the gunshot.
You were just down the hall.
I was sleeping on the couch in the family room, and I heard the shot. Mom kind of runs out the door, and she's hysterical, just screaming. Like a scream I've never heard before in my entire life. There's certain things in life that can't be faked.
Did you question her?
No. I know one of the things came up is that my dad was left-handed. Well, my dad learned how to write left-handed because he had a cast on his arm when he was younger, so he was ambidextrous. He could use his right hand too.
And you had seen him depressed before death?
Yeah.
Was the death of her first husband, that case, ever reopened?
No, it was ruled a suicide.
But with clouds of suspicion gathering over Miriam about the death of her second husband, she does something unexpected.
I met Miriam on a dating site.
A millionaire match?
Millionaire match.
Your profile described me to a T.
Investigators are starting to wonder if they could actually have a black widow on their hand.
I mean, she was finding the husband, she was looking for the money, and then moving on.
With suspicion now mounting that she may be the person who killed her husband, Alan, Miriam Helmick does something unexpected. She goes looking for love again.
Miriam took me to this website for dating men that had a lot of money. I mean, we're talking about very rich. And she picked out this one guy from Orlando. Had a lot in common with her. He liked to dance, and he loved horses, all this stuff.
I met Miriam on a dating site. I owned a dance studio for about 6 or 7 years, and then I had a human resources company for about 20 years. I did very well for myself. Miriam had contacted me first. She wrote, "Saw your profile and loved it. I can dance, any dance, and I'm pretty good at it. Your profile requirement described me complete to a T."
She says, "I'm gonna go down there." I said, "You're what?" I mean, this is just months after Alan had died. Even my girls were like, "God, she's dating already?" And I said, "Yeah."
We met at TGI Fridays. She was very talkative, very nice. We hit it off really good, actually.
Miriam even opens up about the recent loss of her husband.
Miriam had told me that her husband had died of some brain disease. She said that we both felt he was going to die soon anyway, and there was no big deal. We were just waiting for the time. She handled his death very well. I just thought to myself, okay, well, big deal.
Miriam may have been trying to move on and put Alan's death behind her, but back in Colorado, investigators are taking a closer look at her, starting with her alibi from the day of Alan's murder.
Went to Orchard Mesa Market. I went to Walmart. I think I have all the receipts in my pocket.
She was able to pull out the receipts from her pocket of everywhere she had been that morning. Just didn't seem natural to us.
To show up at the police interview with a pocket full of receipts. Suspicious or just thorough?
I would say very odd. That is not a normal thing.
Is that really your first thought, to explain where you had gone in great detail and keeping the receipts?
What did investigators make of her alibi?
Well, they thought it was suspicious, didn't make a lot of sense to them.
And investigators weren't the only ones with suspicions about Miriam.
Miriam Helmick, Helmick.
Remember that local reporter who sat down with her after Alan's murder? She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with her story.
Do you have you planned the funeral yet?
Oh, it's tomorrow at 10.
I start to get a weird feeling as she's talking.
I wanted to get back into dressage and decided I should have a dressage horse, so he bought several.
It was all about her. And these interviews are really supposed to be about the deceased.
His goal in life was to make me happy. He never wanted me to worry about anything or have any problems or anything, and he took care of me, everything.
As I was speaking with her, it went from feeling really bad for her to being suspicious.
Are you scared that this person might come back?
That was it.
Yes
That's
and no.
the look.
I don't want to leave because I'm closer to him here.
She started looking to the side. It's just like when you're talking to somebody and you know that they're lying because of nonverbal cues that they have. When I left that house, I've never scurried away from a place so quickly in my life. I was genuinely scared.
And while Miriam is talking to the media, investigators are talking to those closest to Alan. You continue with the investigation. Actually, you interview Alan's children.
Yes. Right after Alan passed, we were speaking to the daughters, and they had expressed concerns of an inability to get a hold of their dad.
He's been completely out of character, drastically since January. It's odd for my dad.
You've seen him change. You've seen him change his character.
And maybe not so much see him change his character, but through her, I can't even get to him.
He wasn't answering phone calls. He wasn't returning voicemails.
Hi, Dad. It's Portia. I hate to bother you so much. I haven't been able to talk to you, so things are piling up.
Hey, Miriam. This is Christy. I've been calling my dad for about a week, and I'm not hearing back.
And every time I called, Miriam answered. Before then.
His phone?
Yeah.
Okay.
His cell phone. Which I thought was weird. He always answered his phone.
It appeared that he was being distanced from them.
I'm like, well, Dad, is your home phone hooked up? He's like, no. I'm like, well, how does anybody get a hold of you? Well, Miriam doesn't want anybody to bother me.
And when they would call Miriam, there was excuses as to, oh, I'll have him call you back, or he's not around.
She certainly, in the days leading up to his murder, was isolating him from his children.
Alan's kids couldn't help but wonder why Miriam seemed to be keeping them from their father in the months leading up to his murder. Could it have been something to do with a sudden decline in his health?
Father's never sick. My father's like an ox.
Mm-hmm.
And he was, every time I would talk to him, he was sick.
And did he say what he was sick from?
He didn't know. I don't think he had a clue.
But he said he couldn't even stand up. He was so dizzy.
The more investigators dig, the more troubling details they uncover, like a gun that seemed to have disappeared from Miriam and Alan's home.
One of Alan's children said she specifically remembered seeing a .25 caliber pistol in his sock drawer.
They couldn't find that gun after the murder.
Police learn of a shooting incident that had happened outside this house decades before.
Could what they find buried in this yard be the break they need? Detectives will often say that when it comes to investigating, there are no coincidences. And for those working the murder of Alan Helmick, They were certain that attempted car fire just weeks earlier was somehow connected to their case.
This area is where I was dispatched to a car fire. We saw that somebody had placed a wick in the gas tank of a vehicle. We contacted the driver. We were speaking with him. We were speaking with his wife. As I started questioning both of them, I noticed she became a bit nervous, and she said that she wasn't feeling well, needed to run to the restroom. I watched her leave the back of the vehicle, not go into the restroom she just came out of.
Not right here.
Not right here where she just went to the restroom. She actually went across 4 lanes of traffic, which...
That's strange.
Very strange.
Did she ever come back?
Not while I was on scene.
She stayed over there?
She stayed over there.
When you were still here, you went into the ladies' room.
We did.
What did you find there?
We smelled the odor of gasoline. It was fairly strong.
Since investigators learned that Miriam had been standing at the trunk right before Alan discovered the fire, they decided to bluff him, telling Alan there was surveillance video of the incident to see if he thought his wife could have been responsible.
I watched the video.
Is she on there?
I'm asking you. What do you think?
No, is she on there?
I'm
Did she
asking
light
you
it?
what you think.
No, but I could be wrong.
We bluffed Alan, and he said he didn't believe it.
And you didn't answer my question. You looked at the video.
No.
Nice little flick there. If you'd seen her on the video doing it, I would have been shocked.
The crime scene reminded investigators of a movie scene.
After all the dust had settled, our investigators started thinking about what had transpired in Delta. They thought, this sounds like the car explosion scene in No Country for Old Men, which had just come out in the last year and was a popular movie where the villain had created a distraction by lighting a magazine, sticking it into the gas inlet, and exploding the car.
As police are looking into this, they discovered that the Helmicks had rented that movie about 4 days prior to the incident.
Was this the smoking gun or smoking car?
It definitely was part of the investigation. Miriam was not charged with the arson in Delta because of the roadblock put up when Alan demanded the investigation be closed. He did not want to pursue it if we were looking at Miriam, and that he would not cooperate with the investigation.
And the detectives now investigating Alan's murder are still searching for any hard evidence that Miriam pulled the trigger. After all, they still hadn't recovered a murder weapon.
There was the issue of the firearm that was missing from the home. And in talking to the daughters, we knew that there should have been a .25 caliber Lorson in the house.
Because people had seen that gun there before.
Correct.
As luck would have it, there was an old Helmick family story from decades earlier of Alan's first wife's stepfather firing that same gun into the ground during a domestic dispute back in 1989. Could this gun, now missing, be the murder weapon?
There was some evidence that it had been in the house in the years leading up to the murder, and no evidence of what he would have done with that weapon. No evidence he sold it, gave it away, traded it. Where is this gun?
And then investigators bring in a metal detector into the case.
Right.
Detectives come up with a long-shot idea. Go back to the property where that domestic dispute happened back in 1989. Could they recover the bullet fired from that gun and compare it to the bullet that killed Alan?
I received a phone call from the chief investigator at the Sheriff's Department of Mesa County asking me if I would assist them in searching for a bullet.
Carol Quarles is a retired law enforcement officer who has experience using a metal detector to search for missing evidence.
So your reaction when they asked you to get involved in this case?
Oh, yeah, heck yeah. Anytime, just call me. I love finding evidence.
And you started over here?
And I started working my way around. And then I just slowly worked my way around to about midway in the yard, and I hadn't found anything.
And they were getting nervous. The investigator said, well, maybe you're not going to find it.
Yeah, maybe the witness wasn't remembering things right.
Right. To which you said,
let me check over there in case the shooter shot into that corner of the yard. And so I walked over there, and it wasn't 30 to 45 seconds, and I had the bullet.
Where did you find that bullet?
That bullet was right in this area right here. It was an aha moment. I mean, it was euphoric. That's the best way that I can explain it.
And they dug up that bullet that had been there since 1989. They were able to compare that bullet from the ground to the bullet that was recovered from Alan's headshot. And what we were able to determine was that the two bullets were consistent with each other.
The evidence is building up against her.
It is.
At this point, police believe that they have enough to arrest Miriam for Alan's murder.
But this is a woman who police believe orchestrated an attempted firebombing and shot her husband in the head in cold blood. Is she just going to go quietly?
She's being investigated for a homicide. You don't ever know that she doesn't have a gun. If she sees you and she's scared, knows what's going on, it's a real game out there at that point.
In the fall of 2008, just a few months after Alan Helmick's murder, Miriam was living in Jacksonville, Florida, attempting to move on with her life. But her past in Colorado was about to catch up with her.
I was a special agent with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement here in the Jacksonville field office. I got a call from Mesa County Sheriff's detectives, and they were investigating a homicide in Colorado.
Did you have an inkling that she might be a suspect?
It wasn't kind of until I was driving home one day and the Grand Junction police called me and said, is she living? I was like, yeah, she's with me. I don't know what's going on, but she's there.
And we sent 2 investigators down there with an arrest warrant.
They handcuffed her and set her right on the ground. She had a blank expression on her face, like a little bit angry looking almost.
6 months after Alan's death, Miriam is charged with first-degree murder, attempted murder for that car fire, and forgery. She pleads not guilty and is extradited from Florida back to Colorado.
What we had was a man who had led a good life and he ended up murdered, and there's a need to bring to justice the right person.
A year after being arrested and charged, Miriam Helmick goes on trial here at the Mesa County Courthouse. Prosecutors argue that the grieving widow is actually a cold-blooded killer.
Miriam Helmick standing trial for the murder of her husband was a huge deal. The courtroom was pretty packed. It was a bit chilling. Miriam did not show a lot of emotion. She didn't look like herself.
So why do prosecutors believe Miriam killed Alan? They argue the motive was as age-old as they come. Money. Financial motive was the critical part of your argument.
There were suspicious bank account activity where it appeared that Miriam had forged multiple checks from Alan's account. All told, she had taken about $40,000 out of his account through writing those checks.
But the defense pushed back, saying that Miriam had Alan's permission to write those checks, both as his wife and his secretary.
Banks had been calling, trying to get a hold of Alan.
He wasn't being available to his banker, something that had never happened before.
Now there was an urgency.
Right. In fact, the banker had reached out to one of Alan's daughters, and that was tension that was building.
Prosecutors put Alan's daughter, Portia, on the stand to testify about the way Miriam seemed to be isolating her father in the months leading up to his murder.
He was much less involved in my life. He was much more distant. I called him, and when I didn't get to his phone, I called Miriam's phone.
And when they would call Miriam, there was excuses as to, oh, I'll have him call you back, or he's not around.
If Alan was discovering that she had been taking money from him without permission, that was a possible motive.
How would he have reacted if he had found it?
Everything would have been over. You'd had our attorney on a hotline, and it would have been over.
And prosecutors argued that Miriam had tried to kill Alan not once, but twice. The first time in that failed attempt at blowing up his car. They called Miriam's horse breeder and friend, Jerry Yarborough, to the stand.
When I went on the stand, I was super scared because I knew my testimony was going to be not so good for Miriam.
Jerry told jurors about a conversation she said she had with Miriam after that failed car bombing.
She had said that she found out that a car won't explode if it has a full tank of gas.
And when she said that, what was her demeanor?
She laughed.
That catch you off guard?
Pretty much.
But the defense pointed out that if Miriam was after Alan's money, why would she try to blow up his car while he was holding that large cashier's check he had just received?
The piece of evidence that was really the smoking gun, almost literally, was the bullet that was able to be recovered from that lawn in Delta.
How pivotal was that in tying Miriam to the crime?
That was a nice piece of evidence because we didn't actually find the gun, but we had a story about the gun, how it was seen in the home. Now we have a bullet that roughly matches the bullet that was recovered from Alan.
But as Miriam's defense pointed out, roughly matched is not the same as a perfect match.
Couldn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt.
Then the defense did something you don't often see at a murder trial.
Defense calls Miriam Helmick to the stand.
They called Miriam to testify in her own defense.
Once you got inside, what did you see?
I saw Alan on the floor. I dropped my bags and went to him. He was cold and gray. I held his hand for a few minutes and tried to make some sense of it all.
Miriam stayed on that stand for 2 days, denying that she had anything to do with Alan's murder. When prosecutors got their chance to cross-examine her, they pressed her on the infamous run, run, run card that she admitted sending to herself.
You were just acting at that time, weren't you?
Yes, just briefly.
You concocted a complete ruse to lead them on a wild goose chase away from you and towards some phantom killer out there, correct?
If they'd actually had contacted me or listened, then maybe I wouldn't have been at that point.
That was probably not the best decision to be made, but I think at that point she was probably broken, just emotionally and mentally broken.
That video really did undermine Miriam's credibility.
Showing her purchasing that card was very difficult for the defense to rebut.
After 16 days of testimony, the jury gets the case.
They come back with a verdict in 5 hours for a first-degree murder case. You just don't see that.
5 hours was very fast.
The verdict, guilty
on all counts.
There was a little bit of a sigh of relief.
Well, you thought, good, she's going to get what she has coming.
She was sentenced to life without parole. I think that spoke volumes to all of the evidence, circumstantial or not, that was stacked up against her.
But Miriam says the jury got it wrong, and she had a lot more to say when we spoke in her first interview since being convicted. Miriam, are you telling me that your husband Alan started the car fire himself? Why would he do that? It's now been 15 years since Miriam Helmick was sentenced to life for killing her husband, Alan. Since then, she's been at the Denver Women's Correctional Facility, where she recently called me from.
An incarcerated individual at Denver Women's Correctional Facility.
Hello, Miriam.
Hi.
How are you doing over there?
Good, good.
This is the first time she's spoken publicly since her 2009 sentencing. I asked Miriam about first meeting Alan back when she was his dance instructor in Grand Junction.
And was it love at first sight?
Well, not really, no, because I was there trying to work, and but he just never gave up. Let's just put it that way.
He was very persistent.
Yes, very.
And then eventually you fell in love with him.
Yes. It was kind of hard not to. I mean, he's a very, very kind, very sweet man, and he always had your best interest at heart, usually.
Alan's kids say that you were isolating him from them in the months prior to his death. Was that true?
No. But he would get really pale during the day, and I would make him rest. And so I would take his phone away where he wouldn't ring so that he could get some rest. Because it seemed like they always called when he was trying to get a nap.
Next message. Hey, this is Portia. I'm starting to get a complex here because you guys have never not picked up your phone.
Our pathologist, Dr. Kurtzman, indicated there was evidence of advanced heart disease. So if he was not feeling well, it was probably attributable to the heart disease.
Prosecutors say that you fraudulently had written about $40,000 in checks on Alan's money that he was about to find out, and that's why you killed him.
He could look up online anytime and see what was coming out of his bank account. Nobody stopped him from doing that. So anything that was written with his approval.
Did you steal any money from Alan?
No, I didn't take anything from him because everything that was put into the bank went into his bank account. None of it came to me.
Did you have anything to do with starting that car fire?
No, I didn't have any inclination to do it. But I almost believe that he started his own car fire.
You mean to tell me that Alan started the car fire himself? Why would he try to do that and possibly hurt himself?
Well, I don't think he thought about hurting himself, and it took me a while to wrap my head around that he would possibly do anything like that.
Miriam says Alan may have tried to set the car fire for the insurance money.
I started to wonder if he did, because as soon as he got his car home, he applied for the insurance on it.
It's a claim that's hard to back up, but Alan was adamant with authorities that he did not believe Miriam would ever try to kill him.
I had called Alan to advise him that I felt his current wife, Miriam, was trying to kill him. And Alan got upset with me and told me that Miriam would never do that to him. And at that point, he asked me to terminate the case.
What about the gun that was missing from your home and Alan's home?
I didn't know it was missing until this whole thing, so I have no idea how or where it went.
It had an unusual family history, that gun.
I know when I first met him, 2 years before that, I saw it that he was removing, and I asked him to put it away because I don't like handguns. I just don't. I already had to deal with that kind of thing. It was very unnerving to me. That was the last time I saw him.
Now, authorities also questioned your alibi, all the receipts that you had. It looked like you were trying so hard to create an alibi. Were you?
It's not uncommon for anybody to pocket their receipts. I had cash and receipts, so they went in my pocket. I've done that all my life.
It makes sense to us that she shot him before she ran the errands. Then she runs all the errands, and she creates an alibi for herself on purpose, intending to throw people off.
Miriam, did you kill your husband, Alan?
I did not.
Do you think you'll get out of prison someday?
I do, eventually, because I know that I'm going to keep digging, and I know that we're going to be able to put this together.
What do you think will prove your innocence now?
The fact that I had no GSR on me. I had no blood spray on me.
Wouldn't the blood spatter and the gunshot residue be easily washed off if you took a shower?
Well, you know, that's funny because when I went to the police station that afternoon, you could tell I hadn't taken a shower. There was even some dirt under my fingernails, pretty much from doing shovel solved.
So you had not washed anything off?
No, I hadn't changed clothes, nothing.
Miriam has filed numerous appeals with the courts. They've all been rejected, but she vows to keep on fighting.
It won't be over for anybody till it's over for me, and I do have hope. I know that I didn't kill him. Now that I'm on this path, I'm not going to lay down and die with it. I'm sorry, it's just not in my nature to do that.
How often do you think about him?
I think about him all the time. He was funny. He would say things that I remember. His biggest thing was, it's only business. Treat it that way. You know, he was fun to be around.
After the trial, did you see your mom again?
I did not. I have not seen her since the trial.
After so long, what did Miriam finally have to say to her son?
Don't forget, you're gonna put on your jacket too. We're not used to the 30-degree weather that's awaiting us.
No, we're from Florida.
Maybe different.
This past November, Chris Giles and his wife Kelly flew to Colorado for a much-anticipated visit to see his mom, Miriam, in prison.
So she's in the Dimmins Women's Correctional Facility. So it'll be the first time in probably about 15 years that I've seen her. I have not seen her since the trial.
Why not?
I think for one, I didn't want to have to just see her that way. See her kind of broken and see her in that situation. I was also kind of mad. I was mad that all this had kind of happened.
Over the years, one by one, Chris lost his entire family to different forms of tragedy.
It's just kind of a whirlwind, and then all of a sudden this happens.
That new husband dies, and then she's arrested.
Yeah. You're trying to figure out how to deal with those things, and you kind of got to deal with the pain, you got to deal with the hurt. It's rock and roll. It's probably nervous like me, you know, a little bit nervous, a little excited.
Our cameras were not allowed inside the prison, but Chris tells me that reuniting with his mom, while complicated, was also healing for him.
First thing she did was apologize.
What did she say?
As soon as we sat down. She said, I'm sorry for everything I put you through. She said, I'm sorry that we had to go through this. But still, once we got to the Allen part, she was firm in that she was innocent of all that stuff. And so we just hashed out kind of what had happened.
Do you believe your mother had anything to do with Allen's murder?
I do not.
With your father?
I do not, no.
Seeing your mom was a big step for you after all
Yes.
these years.
Forgiveness is a big thing, you know. It's huge when you can work through that and go, I don't have to forget about it, but I can choose to forgive you for it.
But when it comes to Allen's family and friends, there are some things that they say they would rather forget.
I try not to think about the murder. I more like to think about the fun times that we had with Allen. Those are good memories.
What do you think Allen would have wanted people to remember about him?
He was a lot of fun. This kind of guy you could, meet and have a drink with and have a good laugh.
He treated everybody with fairness and respect and gave a lot of love to those around him. Nobody wanted to hurt him except for his own wife. She ended up taking this man's life.
A good man was killed. I don't know whether justice is served or not. She's in jail and apparently she's never going to get out, but he's still dead. You can't bring him back.
I think his legacy is that he was tried and true in the community. He did what he said he was going to do. Allen was truly loved by everyone that knew him.
It started with a smell, not of decay, not yet, but of damp wood and dust, the kind that settles in old houses no one visits anymore. The house stood at the edge of Mill Creek, Illinois, swallowed by trees and silence. Neighbors said it had been empty since the summer of 1991, when the woman inside vanished without a trace. Her name was Rebecca Holloway, 32 years old, choir singer, Sunday school teacher, the kind of woman whose disappearance doesn't make sense because everyone thought they knew her. But in 1991, after a July storm, her door was found wide open, her Bible left on the table, and her car still parked in the driveway. Inside, nothing seemed stolen. No struggle. No blood. Only one thing disturbed the order of that small, quiet home, a single fingerprint smudged across the thin pages of her open Bible. For decades, it was a mystery buried under silence. Detectives called it one of Illinois' most haunting cold cases. The town Mill Creek never recovered. People locked their doors earlier. Parents stopped letting their kids walk to the church choir alone. Every whisper seemed to circle back to Rebecca, the woman who prayed for everyone but was never found herself. The investigation back then was desperate, chaotic. Deputies combed through the woods, dragging the creek behind her house. They found her shoes, one caught between rocks, the other floating downstream. But no body. No sign of a break-in. Just a half-burnt candle on the table, still holding the scent of lavender. Rumors grew faster than leads. Some said Rebecca had run away with a preacher from another county. Others said she'd found out something she wasn't supposed to. Her church, St. Mary's Chapel, had been under quiet scrutiny for missing funds. $127,000 gone untraceable. And she had been the one keeping the ledgers. That was enough to paint a motive, but not enough to find a body. Weeks turned to months. The sheriff at the time, Dale Monroe, told reporters they'd followed every thread, every footprint, every ghost of a clue. He retired 5 years later, broken by the weight of not knowing. By the mid-2000s, the case file was a stack of yellowed photos and handwritten reports kept in a cabinet labeled unsolved. But then in 2024, something changed. A property developer bought the Holloway land. They were planning to tear down the house and build a convenience store. When the demolition team arrived, they found a locked basement door no one knew existed. The hinges were rusted, the handle welded shut by time. It took them 15 minutes and a crowbar to force it open. The air that escaped was foul, stagnant, and old, like the breath of a buried secret. Inside, under the concrete floor wrapped in plastic, was a set of bones. They were fragile but unmistakably human. Alongside them was a rosary rusted at the chain and an old key. But the strangest thing wasn't the body. It was the Bible found beside it. The same Bible that had been on the table 33 years before, its pages stiff with moisture and dust, but still bearing the faint outline of that single fingerprint, the one no one could ever match. When the Illinois Bureau of Investigation reopened the case, they ran every forensic test modern science allowed. DNA extraction, digital fingerprint enhancement, trace residue analysis. The results stunned everyone. The fingerprint on the Bible didn't belong to Rebecca. It belonged to Sheriff Dale Monroe, the man who led the original investigation, who died in 2006 believing he'd failed to find her. The discovery shattered the illusion of the town's peace. Monroe had been a decorated officer, a symbol of rural justice. Now he was a suspect from beyond the grave. The question wasn't just how his fingerprint ended up on that Bible, but why it was there at all. Detective Lorna Keene, leading the reopened investigation, described it as the most paradoxical clue I've ever seen. Monroe's prints had been on file since the early 80s, but no one thought to cross-reference them back then. In the 90s, technology wasn't what it is now. They relied on partial matches, visual comparisons, and luck. This fingerprint, once smudged and partial, was now complete, thanks to advanced reconstruction software, and it fit perfectly. The revelation tore open every file, every report Monroe had written. His notes showed inconsistencies dates that didn't align missing times during the first 48 hours after Rebecca's disappearance. According to his own log, there was a 3-hour window the night she went missing when no one could confirm where he was. He'd told deputies he was coordinating a search perimeter, but there were no records, no radio logs, nothing. Locals began to whisper again. He was in love with her, some said. He was obsessed, others claimed. And when reporters dug into Monroe's past, they found letters unsent found in a box among his personal effects. Each one addressed to R, written in a trembling hand. You forgive everyone, but not me. I see that now. The forensic team concluded that the body found under the basement was indeed Rebecca Holloway, the cause of death blunt force trauma to the skull. The weapon was never recovered. But the key found beside her. It opened the small chest in the church rectory, where donation money was kept. Inside that chest, now empty, investigators found only one item, a church bulletin from July 21st, 1991, the day she vanished. Every discovery made the story darker, stranger. Monroe's family refused to believe he was capable of it. His daughter, Ellen, said on record he never spoke of her, never. But every Sunday he'd light a candle in front of the Virgin Mary, and he'd cry. Quietly. That detail haunted investigators more than any fingerprint could. Was it guilt or grief? Had Monroe killed her in a moment of rage and buried her beneath her own home? Or had someone else done it and he'd covered it up out of misplaced devotion or shame? The answers died with him. In Mill Creek, people started visiting the site again. Some brought flowers. Others brought candles. A few brought their Bibles. The town hadn't had closure in decades, and even now it wasn't clear they ever would. Because while science had solved the who, it never quite solved the why. The media called it the Bible case. Reporters from Chicago descended on the town hungry for footage of the old house, the muddy path down to the creek, the hollow echo of the church bell that still rang every evening at 6. They filmed the cracked stained glass window with the image of Mary and child. They zoomed in on the candle wax still melted on Rebecca's old table, now preserved behind police tape. When the final forensic report was released, it contained a detail almost no one noticed. On the back cover of Rebecca's Bible, faint and barely visible, were words scratched by hand. 3 letters DMR Dale Monroe's initials. The question that haunted investigators wasn't just whether he left that mark, but when. Before she died, or after. The story became national news. Illinois, 1991. Cold case solved fingerprints on Bible crack mystery, the headlines read. But the town knew the truth. Nothing about it felt solved. Rebecca's brother, now an old man, told reporters, "Closure. You don't get closure. You just get quieter ghosts." And maybe he was right. Because late at night, locals still swear they see the faint glow of a candle through the broken windows of the Holloway house flickering against the shadows as if someone's still praying inside. The investigation room smelled like burnt coffee and sleepless hours. Detective Lorna Keene leaned over the evidence table, staring at the photograph of the Bible under the plastic wrap. The fingerprint was clear now, enhanced, precise, undeniable. The old swirl pattern of Sheriff Monroe's right index finger glowed under ultraviolet light like a ghost finally speaking. Around her, the team was silent. No one wanted to say it out loud, but the air was heavy with the unspoken. The town's hero had become its prime suspect decades after his death. The press was already circling like vultures. Bible fingerprint belongs to late sheriff. One headline screamed the next morning. Mill Creek wasn't ready for this. They never are when their savior turns into the shadow. Lorna wasn't local, and that helped. She wasn't tangled in the town's nostalgia or guilt. To her, the case was numbers, patterns, psychology. Yet as she read Monroe's notes, she could feel something else crawling under the surface, a desperation, a tone of obsession in his handwriting. Each report he filed after Rebecca vanished carried the same phrase, search expanded. No result. Continuing. No emotion. No theory. No deviation. Just the repetition of failure. and then in the margins of one sheet written faintly in pencil. She forgave me once. No context. No timestamp. That was enough to make Lorna pause. She started reconstructing the timeline. July 20th, 1991, a Saturday. Rebecca left choir practice at 6:15 p.m. Witnesses saw her walking toward her house carrying a white umbrella. It had been raining all afternoon. The neighbor across the street, a man named Carson Dale, told police he saw her reaching for her keys at the front door. That was the last confirmed sighting. At 7:03 p.m., a 911 call was logged. A woman's voice frantic saying he's inside. The line cut out after 3 seconds. The call came from Rebecca's home phone. When officers arrived, the door was open but no one was there. The clock on the living room wall had stopped at 7:04, likely shorted by the storm. In 1991, the Sheriff's Department had no digital tracing, no cell triangulation, no DNA. They took Prince's cataloged fibers bagged to the Bible and assumed it was evidence of her faith, not her death. Now those old items were whispering truths they couldn't reveal then. The lab re-examined the candle, the wax residue. Traces of skin oil, 2 distinct profiles. One female, one male. The male DNA matched Monroe's surviving toothbrush sample collected by his family after death. That was the breaking point. Statistically, the odds were microscopic that his DNA and fingerprints appeared coincidentally. He had been there. But when before she vanished or after, was he helping in the search or hiding what he'd done? Mill Creek turned on itself overnight. Reporters swarmed the church, the old sheriff's house, even his grave. Monroe had been buried with full honors. Now protesters left notes at his tombstone. You hid her. Justice delayed is not justice denied. His daughter Ellen broke down in front of cameras pleading my father wasn't a murderer. But the town had already decided. Rumor moves faster than fact. Lorna dug deeper, not into evidence, but into emotion. She met with Rebecca's brother Harold Holloway, now 72. He lived in a small nursing home near Peoria. When she showed him the Bible photo, his hands trembled. That book was her heart, he said quietly. She'd write people's names in the margins, people she prayed for. Look close under the light. She always wrote in pencil, real soft. That clue sent forensic analysts back to the artifact. Under infrared, faint writing appeared beside a verse from Psalms. Deliver me from those who lie in wait. And beneath it, D. The letter looked rushed, almost carved. Lorna sat back. This wasn't a random act. Rebecca knew someone was watching her. Maybe she even knew who. By week 3, the team uncovered Monroe's financial history. Bank statements revealed 3 unaccounted deposits in 1991, each around $5,000 cash. The source was listed only as anonymous church donation, the same church that lost $127,000 that year. Lorna began building a profile Monroe, once a respected sheriff, possibly entangled in the church's missing funds. Rebecca, the bookkeeper, discovers the theft. She confronts him. He silences her. But that theory felt too clean, too mechanical. When Lorna looked at the letters he'd written, there was pain, not greed. Something deeper. She visited Ellen Monroe next. The daughter opened the door reluctantly, eyes swollen from days of crying. The house smelled like lemon polish and memory. On the wall hung a faded photograph of Dale Monroe in uniform, his hand resting proudly on a police cruiser. Ellen spoke in fragments. He used to drive out to that house. Every year. On the same day. July 20th. He'd just park across the road, sit there for hours. Why, Lorna asked. Ellen hesitated. He said he was waiting for forgiveness. The phrase echoed through Lorna's mind like a bell. Forgiveness. The same word that kept reappearing in his notes, his letters, his life. She started to see the outline of a tragedy that wasn't just crime, but penance. Maybe Monroe hadn't killed Rebecca in cold blood. Maybe it was an accident. A confrontation that went wrong. Maybe he'd buried her himself out of fear, then spent the rest of his life trying to redeem it through silence. The fingerprint on the Bible, it could have been a goodbye. Still, Lorna needed evidence, not empathy. Forensics ran soil analysis on the basement. Layers of compacted earth showed signs of disturbance, one layer dated to mid-1991, another smaller disturbance around 1996. Something had been moved. The body had been shifted slightly. And that raised a new question: who moved it? Monroe had knee surgery in 1996. He couldn't have done it alone. Someone helped him. Cross-referencing local phone records from that year revealed a pattern: multiple calls between Monroe and the local pastor, Father Gideon Mark. The priest was 78 now, retired, living quietly in Springfield. Lorna paid him a visit. He greeted her with the calm of a man who had long rehearsed denial. But when she mentioned Rebecca Holloway, his eyes dimmed. She was light in a dark place, he said softly. Too pure for this town. When asked about Monroe, his answer came slower. He came to confession. Often. More often than most. But confession dies here, detective. He tapped his chest. That's between him and God. But even silence can betray truth. Lorna noticed a tremor in his hand when she mentioned the basement. She leaned forward. Did he ever talk about moving her? The priest closed his eyes. I can't answer that. That wasn't denial. That was survival. Back in Mill Creek, the story took a darker turn. Anonymous letters began arriving at the police department, typed on old paper signed "Only Witness." The first one read, "You're digging too deep." The Bible isn't the only thing he touched. Another arrived 3 days later. Look under the church steps. Lorna ordered a ground scan of St. Mary's front entrance. Beneath the concrete radar detected a hollow space, a small cavity sealed with stone. When they pried it open, they found an old wooden box wrapped in cloth. Inside, photographs. Dozens of them. All of Rebecca. Some candid, some clearly taken without her knowledge. And at the bottom, a single photograph of Sheriff Monroe standing beside her at a town fair, smiling. On the back, written in pencil, "Her voice still follows me." That discovery erased all doubt, obsession, the letters, the silent vigils, the guilt. It wasn't a sudden crime, it was the slow descent of a man haunted by what he couldn't control. But if he loved her, why kill her? Lorna reviewed the autopsy report again. Blunt force trauma, no defensive wounds. That meant she likely knew her killer trusted him. Perhaps she let him in. Perhaps there was an argument. A moment of panic. One blow too hard, one heartbeat too late. The town's history began to crumble under this new light. The church lost half its congregation. Reporters dug into every old sermon Father Gideon had ever given. People wanted someone alive to blame. Meanwhile, Rebecca's remains were finally released for burial. Her brother insisted she be laid to rest beside her parents with the same Bible placed atop her coffin, this time sealed behind glass fingerprint and all. As the hearse passed through Mill Creek's main road, the town stood silent. No cameras, no chants, just the echo of what had been lost. Lorna watched from a distance unseen. She knew the case was technically solved. The files would close. The DNA, the fingerprints, the photographs, each piece fit together now. But the weight of it lingered. Because behind every solved case, there's always one truth: no evidence can touch motive. Later that night, Lorna returned to her office. The room was dim except for the soft hum of the computer. She reopened Monroe's last personal note found in a drawer of his old desk. 4 words written in fading ink: "I never meant to." It wasn't an excuse, it was an epitaph. She turned off the lamp and stared into the darkness, thinking about how thin the line really is between justice and regret. Somewhere out there, the rain began to fall again, tapping softly against the glass like a quiet reminder that some ghosts don't vanish when you name them. They just whisper a little louder. Night settled over Mill Creek like a heavy curtain, and the town finally exhaled after weeks of chaos. But inside the Illinois Bureau's temporary command post, a converted library near the courthouse, Detective Lorna Keene couldn't shake the unease crawling up her spine. The case should have been closed. Monroe's guilt, Rebecca's remains, the fingerprint, the Bible, all of it formed a perfect circle. But something refused to sit still. It was the new letter. the one left on her windshield that morning. A plain white envelope, no return address, no handwriting on the outside. Inside a single sheet of paper with words typed on an old typewriter. She wasn't the only one. The words were aligned crookedly uneven ink impressions from worn-out keys. It wasn't a prank. It was a warning or a confession. Lorna stared at it under the lamplight, the edges trembling in her hands. She'd seen hundreds of anonymous letters over her career. But this one had something different, the smell of mildew and the faint trace of perfume. The same lavender scent that clung to Rebecca's candle 33 years ago. She handed it to the evidence team. Within hours, the forensics lab confirmed the impossible. There was a partial fingerprint pressed into the paper fibers. It matched Dale Monroe again. The problem: the typewriter used to print the note was manufactured in 2023. Lorna felt the air thicken. "Run it again," she said. They did. Same result. The lab techs swore it wasn't contamination. Monroe's fingerprint, posthumous, undeniable, had somehow found its way onto a document created almost 2 decades after his death. The only logical explanation was contamination from old evidence bags. But logic felt thinner with every minute that passed. The next day, a discovery hit the department like lightning. In the archives of the neighboring county, St. Clair, an evidence clerk contacted them about a strange coincidence. Another cold case from 1993, 2 years after Rebecca vanished. A young woman named Emily Rourke disappeared after evening mass. Her case file contained a fingerprint that had never matched anyone until the new state database pinged it, automatically linking it to Dale Monroe. 2 women, same region, both churchgoers, both vanishing after Sunday service, and both linked years later to a sheriff who had sworn to protect them. Lorna stared at the case photos of Emily Rourke, 24, auburn hair, kind, smile nursing student. Her last known location, a small chapel 30 miles west of Mill Creek. The report said she'd been volunteering at a church event when she was last seen walking toward her car. The next morning, the car was still there. Door unlocked, Bible open on the passenger seat, a smear of wax on the steering wheel, the same lavender candle scent. It was too precise to be coincidence. But Monroe by then had been heavily monitored. His career was winding down. No record placed him near St. Clair that night, yet the evidence didn't care about paperwork. Lorna reopened Monroe's service logs. Between July and August 1993, he had reported 3 out-of-county search consultations. Vague terminology for trips without clear documentation. Each coincided with disappearances near church grounds across southern Illinois. None of those cases were solved, and each she discovered involved women connected to parish groups, volunteers, organists, or teachers. The pattern sent a chill down her back. It wasn't a love story gone wrong, it was ritualistic. As the storm gathered outside, Lorna drove back to Mill Creek. The Holloway house had been sealed again after the discovery, but she still had clearance. She walked through the ruins, flashlight cutting through the dust. The walls creaked like bones under strain. In the basement, she crouched beside the spot where Rebecca's remains had been found. The soil was cold and damp. She brushed it with her glove, feeling a strange unevenness. The ground had settled unevenly after exhumation. Beneath it, the radar had shown nothing else officially. But Lorna trusted her instincts more than instruments. She ordered another ground scan. By dawn, the results came in. A secondary void, smaller, deeper, maybe 2 feet below the first grave. The team dug carefully, inch by inch. Then, under the beam of flashlights, the shovel hit something metallic. It wasn't a coffin, not even a box, just a small tin container sealed tight. Inside were photographs. Old, decayed, but clear enough. 3 women, including Rebecca. Posed near church events, choir gatherings, Sunday school. Each one had a handwritten date on the back, 1989, 1990, 1991. And behind the last photo, one more image, Emily Rourke, 1993. The connection was real now, carved in evidence, and on the back of her photo, one phrase appeared again, faint but legible. "Forgive me, Father, Lorna stared at the word cold realization spreading through her chest. Monroe wasn't just haunted, he was methodical. The pattern wasn't random violence. It followed the rhythm of confession, repentance, sin, and silence. He'd chosen women who represented purity, faith, community. He'd placed Bibles, candles, and handwritten apologies near them, almost like he was building his own distorted scripture. When Lorna presented this to her superior, Captain Royce, he refused to believe it. "You're saying the sheriff was a serial offender, and no one noticed?" "I'm saying the town didn't want to notice," she replied. "They worshipped him. He was their law, and their preacher, rolled into one. Who questions the man who leads the prayer and the patrol?" By midweek, the FBI became involved. They pulled a full audit of Monroe's cases from 1985 to 1996. 43 missing person reports. 8 female victims unaccounted for. Of those 5 shared identical patterns: church connection, rural disappearance, missing Bible or candle nearby. The media frenzy reignited. Sheriff turned predator Illinois. Cold case expands multiple women linked to Bible clues. Mill Creek went from mourning to denial to pure panic. The church's doors were vandalized overnight, spray-painted with words like sinners and false prophets. Father Gideon disappeared 2 days later, his home empty, personal belongings gone. His car was found abandoned near Route 41 with his clerical collar on the dashboard and a note: "Some sins are not forgiven." Lorna's gut told her he wasn't dead. He was running. Maybe not from guilt, but from what he knew. Late that night, she reviewed an old tape from 1992, one of Monroe's internal interviews with local clergy. The video was grainy, time-stamped in red at the bottom corner. Monroe sat across from Father Gideon, the camera rolling between them. "You believe in absolution?" Monroe asked. "For the living, yes," the priest answered carefully. "But not for the ones who hide." Monroe's expression twisted into something unreadable. "Sometimes the ones who hide are the ones God sees first." Then the tape cut out. It wasn't proof, but it was a confession buried in metaphor. The next morning, a new envelope arrived at headquarters. Same typewriter font, same uneven alignment. This time, it contained coordinates, latitude and longitude, printed neatly. They led to an abandoned rest stop off I-64 halfway between Mill Creek and St. Clair. Lorna and her team arrived before dawn. The place was silent trees clawing at the cracked pavement. Beneath a rusted picnic table half buried in dirt, they found a wooden cross, crudely carved initials etched into it: ER, a new grave, a new ghost. The forensic team dug carefully, their gloves slicing through decades of soil. Bones surfaced wrapped in cloth just like Rebecca's. But there was something else: a candle stub melted halfway down and a torn piece of paper trapped in wax. Lorna lifted it gently, her flashlight catching the faint letters. It read, "I never meant to." The same phrase found in Monroe's note. For a moment no one spoke. The air seemed to freeze around them. Lorna closed her eyes. The echoes were too deliberate to ignore. If Monroe had acted alone, these clues wouldn't exist after his death. Someone else was continuing his ritual or reviving it. A copycat, maybe someone who admired him or someone he'd trained, confided in before the end. She stared at the shallow grave rain beginning to fall again, soft and relentless. "This isn't over," she murmured. Back at headquarters, she pored over every file from Monroe's final years. His last deputy, his confidants. One name surfaced repeatedly: Deputy Henry Lattimore, transferred out of Mill Creek in 1994 after unspecified internal dispute. No further records. Lorna traced him to a small town near the Indiana border. Retired, living alone off the grid, and once years ago he'd been the officer who collected the evidence from Rebecca's house. He was the one who sealed the Bible bag. If anyone had access to Monroe's fingerprints, old notes, even his DNA from discarded items, it was Lattimore. Lorna felt the blood drain from her face. "Get me his address," she said quietly. That night, under the hum of storm clouds, she drove out alone. The rain followed her like a shadow. When she reached Lattimore's house, it stood dark and silent, a single porch light flickering against the wind. She stepped out, rain soaking through her coat, her flashlight cutting across the yard. And there, nailed to the door, was another envelope. Same typewriter ink, same lavender scent. This one had only 5 words. "You're closer than you think." Rain poured down the slanted roof of Henry Lattimore's house, cutting streaks of light through the windows. The door stood half open, creaking slowly in the wind. Detective Lorna Keene didn't call for backup. She wanted to see what waited inside without the noise of sirens or shouting men. The silence was heavier that way, more honest. She raised her flashlight and stepped through the threshold. The air smelled like wet paper and old wood with a faint trace of lavender. Always lavender. The living room looked frozen in time. Every surface was covered with dust except one table near the wall. On it, a Bible lay open, its pages stiff, a candle burnt down to its base beside it. The wax had pooled into a shape that looked like a hand reaching for something. The same scene, the same ritual repeated like scripture in every crime Monroe touched. Lorna's beam swept across the walls, photographs, dozens of them framed, yellowed, uneven. Most were old police group shots, men in uniform shaking hands, smiling. But in the corner near the staircase was a single portrait, Dale Monroe in his prime, and beside him a younger Henry Lattimore face half-turned proud and eager. Footsteps echoed above her. Slow, measured. Someone was still here. She drew her weapon, climbed each stair carefully, her heart sinking with the rhythm of her steps. At the top, a door stood ajar, light spilling from the crack. She nudged it open with the barrel of her gun. The room was small, crowded with filing cabinets and cardboard boxes. Maps pinned to the walls marked with red thread connecting towns across Illinois. Mill Creek, St. Clair, Belleville, Marion, each one tagged with a date. At the center, a cross made of twine intersected at 1991, Rebecca's year. Henry Lattimore sat in a chair facing the window. His hands were folded neatly on his lap as if waiting for prayer. The lamp beside him flickered. His voice came before he turned. "I knew you'd come." "Stand up," Henry Lorna said. "Hands where I can see them." He didn't move. "You think this is about me," he whispered, "but it's not. It never was." "Then who is it about?" He turned slowly, and for a second, Lorna thought she saw guilt etched into the lines of his face. Not fear, not surprise, but something close to resignation. "It's about atonement," he said. Something Dale never finished. Lorna stepped closer, eyes locked on him. "You've been sending letters, planting new evidence, using his prints." Henry smiled faintly. "I didn't have to plant them. They were always there. Every file, every photo, every tape. He left his mark everywhere. I just helped the world finally see it. You had access to his DNA. You fabricated the letters to keep the case alive." He shook his head. "No, detective. I preserve the truth. You think we can kill sin by burying it? No. It grows roots. It keeps whispering until someone listens." His words crawled under her skin. She looked at the wall again. The maps, the red thread, the marks. "How many?" she asked. Henry leaned back, eyes glassy. 8 that we know of. Maybe more. He couldn't stop. Every time he tried to walk away, something dragged him back. He said he saw her face in every sermon, every Sunday hymn. Said God was punishing him with memory. "You knew," Lorna said quietly. "You knew he killed Rebecca, and you covered for him." Henry's jaw tightened. "He was my mentor, my father in everything but name. When he confessed, I thought he was dying. I thought it was just words. But then he showed me where she was buried. I told him to turn himself in. He said he would after one last prayer. He never did." Lorna took a step closer. "So you took over his ritual." He laughed softly, a dry, hollow sound. "You don't understand. The ritual was never his. It was hers." That stopped her cold. "What do you mean?" Henry stood slowly, his shadow stretching long across the floor. "Rebecca. She believed in redemption more than anyone, even for monsters. She used to tell us, every sin wants to come home. When she died, Dale believed he could finish what she started, bring every lost soul to light. But sin doesn't stop when you confess it. It spreads. Lorna's grip on the gun tightened. Where's Father Gideon? Henry's eyes flickered. Gone. He was part of it too. They all were. Every man who touched that church. Every one of them knew something was wrong, but they kept singing, kept praying. He left because he couldn't bear to see the truth revealed. Did you kill Emily Rourke? Lorna demanded. He looked almost offended. No, that was Dale. I just made sure people remembered her. Someone has to remember, don't you think? Lorna's stomach turned. And the letters. I wrote them because you were forgetting too. You were about to close the file. You would have buried her again. For a moment, the only sound was the rain tapping the window pane. Lorna lowered her weapon slightly. You could have gone to the press, to the state's attorney. Henry smiled sadly. Truth doesn't live in headlines. It lives here. He tapped his temple. In guilt. In silence. A sharp crack broke the air. The lamp went dark. Lorna flinched, flashlight jerking. When the beam found him again, Henry was holding something small and metallic. Not a gun. A tape recorder. This, he said, is the last confession. He pressed a play. Static filled the room, then a voice familiar, trembling, unmistakable. Dale Monroe. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I can't remember when it started. Maybe with the first time she smiled. Maybe before that. I thought I was protecting her. I thought if I kept her close, she'd be safe. But temptation hides inside good intentions, doesn't it? I didn't mean to hurt her. I only wanted her to stop crying. And when she fell, I prayed. I prayed until the morning came, but God didn't answer. Maybe he never does. Lorna's throat tightened. The tape continued. Henry helped me move her. He said I had to face it, but I couldn't. So I left her there, and every year I came back to see if the ground had forgiven me. It never did. Static swallowed the rest. Henry shut off the recorder, his hand shaking. He gave me that tape before he died. Said one day someone like you would come. Someone who still believed in justice. You should have turned this in. I tried, Henry whispered. No one cared then. They don't care now. They just want closure, not truth. There's a difference. He placed the recorder on the table beside the Bible and stepped back. It's all yours now. Everything he did. Everything we buried. Lorna took a step forward, but his next movement stopped her. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small vial of clear liquid and uncapped it. Henry, don't, she shouted. But he was already drinking. The vial fell shattering against the floor. He sank to his knees, eyes glazing over, a faint smile on his lips. As his breathing slowed, he whispered one last line. She forgave me too. The room went silent except for the rain. Lorna called for medical support, but she knew it was pointless. Poison worked faster than guilt. An hour later, the house was crawling with officers. Evidence teams packed the tapes, the maps, the photographs. Lorna stood outside under the storm-drenched, staring at the sky. Another dead man, another confession, another ending that didn't feel like one. The story was supposed to be over, but her instincts said otherwise. Because on the wall behind Henry's chair, hidden by the dim light, she'd seen something no one else noticed. A photograph freshly printed, a woman's face she didn't recognize. Younger, modern clothes, short hair. On the back, handwritten in neat ink, 2023. St. Mary's S. Forgive me, Father. That was yesterday. Lorna's chest tightened as realization struck. Someone new had taken up Monroe's legacy. The ritual wasn't dead. It had evolved. She turned toward the flashing lights of the patrol cars, the red and blue washing over her face like the colors of warning. This isn't over, she murmured again, her voice barely audible over the rain. It never was. The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days. It drummed against the windshield like the heartbeat of the case itself, steady, unrelenting, mocking. Lorna Keene sat inside her cars outside the police station, staring at the photograph she'd taken from Lattimore's wall. A woman's face, faintly smiling, mid-20s, cropped hair, clear eyes. Underneath, in that same tight handwriting, 2023, St. Mary S. Forgive me, Father. It wasn't nostalgia. It was a warning. The ritual was back. Inside the station, the night shift was thin. She walked past rows of empty desks, flickering monitors, and the hum of old fluorescent lights. The air smelled like burnt coffee and exhaustion. She dropped the photo on the captain's desk. "She's alive," Lorna said flatly. Or she was. Someone's reenacting Monroe's killings. Captain Royce rubbed his temples, unimpressed. "You've been awake 40 hours, you're seeing ghosts. Ghosts don't leave timestamps," she snapped. "This picture was printed yesterday, at St. Mary S." An hour later, she was driving again, highway lights slicing through the rain. The town of St. Mary's lay 15 miles east of Mill Creek, little more than a cluster of houses around an old brick church. Built in 1894, restored in 2019 after lightning hit its steeple. The new pastor, Father Michael Devereaux, had transferred from Chicago 2 years ago. Lorna had read his file earlier that day. Young, articulate, the kind of priest who drew crowds. His sermons were live-streamed, polished, poetic. He preached about forgiveness, redemption, cleansing sin through memory. The same words Monroe had used in his journals. When she pulled into the gravel lot behind the church, the lights inside were still on, though it was nearly midnight. The front doors were unlocked. She stepped inside quietly. The air was warm and thick with incense. Rows of candles flickered along the altar, casting gold light across the marble. And there, kneeling at the front pew, was a man in black robes. He turned slowly, a faint smile cutting through the shadows. "Detective Keene," he said softly. "You've come sooner than I expected." She kept her hand near her holster. "You know who I am." "Everyone does. The woman who gave the dead their voice. You've stirred old ghosts, Detective." His tone was calm, practiced, a voice meant for sermons, not confessions. She stepped closer. "You took this picture," she said, holding it up. "Who is she?" He looked at it as though seeing a relic. "Her name was Claire Donnelly. Volunteer at our food program. She wanted to understand grace. She thought forgiveness meant becoming the wound instead of healing it." "Where is she?" He tilted his head. "Gone, like the others." Lorna's pulse quickened. "You mean dead." Delivered, he corrected gently. The word hung in the air, cold and deliberate. She walked past the pews, scanning the altar. The setup looked normal at first: candles, crucifix, open Bible. But something was wrong with the pages. They were damp, smudged with dark fingerprints. She looked closer. The book was open to Psalm 51. "Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin." Beneath the verse, etched into the paper with a knife, were 3 initials: DMR, Dale Monroe's. Her voice dropped. "You're copying him." Devereaux smiled faintly. "No, I'm finishing him. He was the first prophet of guilt. He understood that salvation isn't about the living, it's about the ones who wait for judgment." "You're sick," she said. "I'm faithful," he whispered. "Mill Creek forgot what sin feels like. I remind them." Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from the back corridor. She turned her flashlight. A shape moved behind the confessional booths. A small door creaked open, then slammed. She ran. The corridor led to the sacristy, then down a narrow stairwell to the cellar. The air turned colder as she descended. The walls were lined with candle niches, each filled with half-melted wax. On the floor lay a row of white lilies, freshly cut. Her light caught something ahead, a table draped in white cloth. On it, a woman, Claire Donnelly. Her skin pale, her hands folded around a rosary. The scene was grotesque and reverent all at once, like a painting of martyrdom. On the wall above her, written in ash, "She forgave him." Lorna's breath caught. She stepped forward, scanning the body. No signs of struggle, no wounds except one bruise at the base of the skull, the same as Rebecca. From behind her, Devereaux's voice floated down the stairs. "She asked for this," he said. "She said she wanted to be clean." "Put your hands up," Lorna barked, turning sharply. He didn't move. "Do you believe in coincidence, Detective?" he asked. "Dale Monroe was buried under the sign of the cross. I was ordained under that same sign. His sins called to me. I didn't choose this. It chose me. You killed her. I absolved her." Lorna fired once into the ceiling, the sound exploding through the cellar. Hands up. For a second, he actually obeyed. He raised his arms, palms outward, eyes lifted to the ceiling like a man mid-prayer. Then he whispered, "Forgive me, Father," and lunged. She barely dodged, striking him with her flashlight. He crashed into the candles, sending sparks across the floor. They wrestled in the half-light, the room filling with smoke and wax. He was strong, too strong for his frame, but desperation makes men powerful. She slammed her elbow into his ribs, breaking his grip, and he fell backward into the table. The rosary scattered beads rolling across the stone. She pinned him down, gun at his throat. "You're done, Father!" He smiled through blood. "You can't stop Faith. Faith didn't do this. You did. Then shoot me. Make me your next confession." For a moment she almost did, but something inside her snapped back discipline duty fatigue. She cuffed him instead, pulling him to his feet as the candles guttered out. When backup finally arrived, the rain had stopped. The church loomed silent, its steeple cutting the gray dawn like a blade. By morning, the story was everywhere. Copycat priest arrested in Illinois. Cold case resurrection. The media swarmed St. Mary S. Cameras flashed against the stained glass as officers carried evidence bags through the doors. Devereaux didn't speak again. He just smiled through the interview's lips, moving silently as though praying. At headquarters, Lorna filed the report with steady hands. DNA confirmed Claire Donnelly's death was homicide, cause blunt force trauma, weapon candlestick. Her fingerprints covered the Bible. His were layered on top. Another confession disguised as worship. But something in the evidence photo caught Lorna's eye. The Bible page. Psalm 51 had another faint impression beneath the ink, pressed deep enough to leave a mark from previous writing. Under UV light, the words appeared backward, faint but readable. "You're not done." She felt her stomach tighten. 2 days later, St. Mary's burned. No suspect. Witnesses said they saw a flicker of light inside before the roof collapsed. The fire department ruled it electrical, but the report mentioned one detail the news never printed. At the center of the ashes, near what used to be the altar, they found a Bible untouched by flame. The same one from the cellar, perfectly preserved. Its pages fell open on their own when the investigators lifted it. Psalm 51 again, and beside it a fresh fingerprint. Not Devereaux's, not Monroe's, not Lattimore's. Lorna stood over the evidence table, staring at the print. It was hers. The lab confirmed it. Partial, but clean. She hadn't touched the book since it was sealed. Contamination, maybe. But deep down, she knew the truth wasn't scientific. The ritual had always been about inheritance. Guilt passed from one believer to the next like a blessing twisted into a curse. She closed the file quietly, ignoring the reporters waiting outside. When she stepped into the rain again, it was gentle this time, soft, almost cleansing. The town was waking, lights flickering in kitchen windows, people going back to their lives as if the nightmare had finally ended. But she knew better. In the reflection of her car window, the streaks of water looked like fingerprints sliding down glass. Back in the driver's seat, she reached for the recorder she'd taken from Lattimore's house. She hadn't played it since the night he died. She pressed play. Static, then Monroe's trembling voice once more. "Sin doesn't vanish. It waits for the next hand willing to carry it." She switched it off. The sound of rain filled the silence. Her phone buzzed. A new message. No number. Just words on the screen. "Forgiveness begins with you." She looked out at the church ruins. Smoke still rising faintly in the dawn. Somewhere inside, maybe under the rubble, the Bible waited again, unburned, unreadable, eternal. She knew she should leave, close the case, move on. But she also knew she wouldn't. Some stories refuse to end. Lorna started the car, headlights cutting through the mist. As she drove away, a distant church bell rang behind her, 3 slow chimes. And in the brief silence between each one, she swore she could hear a whisper, soft and steady, threading through the sound of rain. "Deliver me from those who lie in wait." Smoke still clung to the air 3 days after the fire. The blackened skeleton of St. Mary's Church stood against the pale morning like a monument to unfinished prayers. The cross at the top of the steeple had melted halfway, drooping toward the earth as if ashamed. Police tape fluttered in the wind. Detective Lorna Keene stepped across the charred threshold with an evidence mask pulled tight over her mouth. The ground was wet with soot and rainwater, and every step she took made a hollow sound like walking on broken promises. The fire department's report called the blaze electrical malfunction. She didn't believe that for a second. The pattern of the burn was too deliberate, beginning near the altar, spreading in a perfect semicircle, stopping just before the nave. The flames had made a halo, sparing the center where the Bible had been found untouched. That impossible detail haunted her. She crouched beside the ash pit where the book had rested. Even now she swore the earth felt warm. A forensic tech handed her a tablet with the fingerprint analysis. "It's you," he said quietly. "Your index right. No mistake." Lorna nodded, eyes fixed on the ash. Bag it anyway. Back at headquarters, she sat alone in the evidence room, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the silence. The Bible was sealed behind glass, its pages stiff and curled. Her reflection stared back from the casing, tired eyes, hollow cheeks, streaks of soot across her skin. She reached out without thinking, hand hovering above the glass. The moment her fingers brushed the surface, a static pulse rippled beneath it. The Bible shifted slightly as if moved by breath. She jerked back. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Maybe she was hallucinating. Maybe exhaustion had finally taken her apart. She took a deep breath, pulled out the recorder again, and pressed play. Monroe's voice crackled through the static. "Sin waits for the next hand." She stopped it mid-sentence, stared at the screen, then whispered to herself, "Not mine." But the next day proved her wrong. At 9:47 a.m., a call came in from the coroner's office. They had found something inside Claire Donnelly's coffin during post-fire re-examination, a folded slip of paper hidden in the lining, typed on the same old machine as the letters before. The message read, "The detective will cleanse us all. No fingerprints, no traceable ink." Lorna felt her pulse hammering in her ears. Someone was orchestrating this now, deliberately, intimately. It wasn't just imitation, it was manipulation. She looked at the Bible again. Her fingerprint had been discovered, broadcast documented. Anyone could have copied it. But why her? That night, she returned to her apartment for the first time in days. The city lights shimmered through the rain-soaked window. On her kitchen counter lay a small cardboard box wrapped in brown paper. No postage, no label. Just her name in faint black ink. She froze. Slowly, she opened it. Inside was a charred piece of wood, part of a church pew, and a single photograph. Dale Monroe's grave, freshly disturbed. The soil looked wet, recently turned. She grabbed her keys, adrenaline burning away fatigue, and drove to Mill Creek Cemetery. The road was empty, fog curling around the headlights. When she reached the gate, it was unlocked. She pushed through the gravel, crunching underfoot. Monroe's grave sat at the far edge near the tree line. The ground was indeed disturbed earth piled loosely, shovel marks still visible. Her flashlight beam caught something metallic near the headstone. A rosary chain broken, tangled around a small recorder. She picked it up, pressed play. Nothing but static. Then faintly, her own voice echoed back, recorded without her knowing. "You're not done." The words she'd read under ultraviolet on the burned Bible. Her breath caught. Someone was watching her, following her movements, repeating her words. A twig snapped behind her. She spun, gun raised. Nothing but mist and shadows, yet the silence felt inhabited, as if the darkness itself was listening. She backed toward the car slowly, every instinct screaming. When she reached the door, something glinted on the windshield. Another envelope, sealed and soaked. She tore it open. Inside, ashes and a note. "You carry the faith now." Back in her apartment, she poured whiskey into a glass she didn't drink from. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces Rebecca, Emily, Claire, layered one over another like a single shifting apparition. The rhythm of their deaths pulsed in her head. Candle, Bible, bruise, prayer. Over and over. It wasn't a pattern anymore. It was a chant. She began pinning the photos to her wall again, recreating the map Lattimore had left behind. Mill Creek, St. Clair, Marion, St. Mary O.S. 4 points. When she drew lines between them, the shape formed a perfect cross. At the center was empty farmland, a derelict retreat once owned by St. Mary's Parish, abandoned after flood damage in 1998. She checked property records. No recent activity, no electricity, no maintenance. Yet yesterday's fire report listed a utility payment routed through the same parish account. Someone was still funding it. She grabbed her coat. The road to the retreat was narrow, winding through fields silvered by moonlight. The rain had stopped, but fog crawled low across the ground, thick as breath. When she reached the gate, it was open. Her flashlight cut through the dark, revealing an old wooden sign nearly swallowed by Ivy Sanctum House. The paint peeled away around the words, but she could still read the motto etched below mercy through confession. Inside the building smelled of damp wood and rust. Long corridors stretched into silence. She moved carefully, flashlight sweeping across broken pews and crumbling icons. At the end of the hall was a heavy door, its frame scorched. On it, written in soot, was a phrase she knew too well. "Deliver me from those who lie in wait." Her stomach twisted. She pushed it open. The room beyond was circular, lined with mirrors, darkened by smoke. In the center stood a table with a single candle burning the flame steady despite the draft. Beside it, another Bible, and in front of it, a chair facing away from her. Someone sat there still. "Step away from the table," she ordered. No answer. She moved closer, gun ready. When she circled the chair, her breath hitched. It was Father Devereaux alive somehow. His wrists were bound, head tilted downward, eyes wide open, but his chest wasn't moving. On his lap lay a small tape recorder still running. Lorna pressed stop, then play. A new voice spoke. Calm, measured, unfamiliar. "You have done well, detective. Each sin cleansed brings us closer. One more step and you will understand. You are the last witness." The tape clicked off. She stood frozen, the air heavy with the smell of wax and smoke. Then, behind her, one of the mirrors shifted slightly. A shadow moved across the reflection, slow, deliberate. She turned flashlight, cutting through dust, but there was nothing there. Only her reflection, trembling. For the first time, she noticed it wasn't exact. The woman in the mirror wasn't holding a gun. She was holding a Bible. The glass cracked down the center. Lorna stumbled back, breath shallow. The candle flickered violently, then went out, plunging the room into darkness. From somewhere behind the walls came a faint sound, soft, rhythmic, like pages turning. When the backup team arrived 20 minutes later, they found her sitting outside the building, soaked in sweat and rain. Inside, there was no sign of Father Devereaux's body. The chair was empty, the Bible gone. They asked what she'd seen. She said nothing, just stared at the horizon where dawn was beginning to break pale and indifferent. In her pocket, she felt something cold. She pulled it out. A single rosary bead. She hadn't taken it. Back at headquarters, she locked the evidence room herself. Cameras off, lights dim. The sealed Bible rested in its case. She stared at it for a long time. Then, unable to stop herself, she unlocked the latch. The glass lifted with a hiss. She reached out and touched the cover. This time, the pages opened on their own. Psalm 51, again, and beneath the verse, a new line written in fresh ink. Not typed, not carved. "The detective will cleanse us all." The lights flickered once, then died. Outside, thunder rolled across the Illinois sky, slow and distant, like the echo of something that had never really ended. The lights came back on at dawn, humming weakly through the station, but Lorna hadn't moved. She sat in the evidence room, the Bible still open before her, her hand trembling where it rested on the table. The inked words on the page were still wet. She touched them, half expecting the letters to smear, but they didn't. The handwriting wasn't hers. She knew her own loops and angles. This was sharper, cleaner, almost reverent, as if whoever wrote it wasn't leaving a message but a command. The detective will cleanse us all. She shut the book, locked it back in the glass case, but the whisper it left behind followed her out of the room. In the hallway, the hum of the fluorescent lights felt louder than usual. Every sound stretched and lingered, the echo of her footsteps. The creak of doors, the hum of the vending machine at the end of the corridor. Everything felt slightly off balance, as though the building itself was listening. When she reached her desk, there was a note waiting. No envelope this time, just a folded piece of paper placed perfectly in the center. Inside a single sentence typed in that same old font, "You opened the door." Her stomach tightened. There were cameras in the building, 24-hour surveillance, yet no one had seen anyone enter. She called for the security feed from the evidence room. The tech rewound the footage. At 3:02 a.m., the screen went static for exactly 7 seconds. When it cleared, she was visible again, sitting exactly where she remembered, staring at the Bible. But the angle showed something she hadn't felt then, a shadow standing behind her chair, perfectly still. The tech frowned. Could be a glitch, reflected movement. Or someone else, she murmured. The next day, her captain pulled her from the case. "You're too close." He said, his voice low, almost kind. "You've been awake for days. Go home, get some sleep." She didn't argue. There was no point. Outside, the storm had cleared, leaving the air unnaturally still. She drove home through streets still streaked with ash from the fire. Every church bell she passed seemed to ring at the wrong time. When she reached her apartment, she saw something pinned to the door, another photograph. Herself asleep in her car, parked outside the church ruins. Someone had been close enough to take it without waking her. She tore it down, heart pounding, and stepped inside. The lights flickered once as she entered. The apartment was dark except for the glow of her computer screen. It had turned itself on. On the monitor, an email window blinked open, unsent. The tow field was blank. The subject line read, "Confession." And in the message box, her own words appeared one by one, typing themselves. "I am the one who found them. I am the one who touched the Bible." She yanked the cord from the wall. The screen went black, but the message lingered in her head line for line like a memory she hadn't written yet. Sleep came like drowning. She dreamed of water and ashes, of Rebecca Holloway standing ankle-deep in a flooded church whispering a prayer Lorna couldn't hear. Behind her, Monroe's silhouette loomed, hand outstretched, holding the same Bible, its pages fluttering though there was no wind. Then the scene shifted. The church burned again, and in the fire's glow she saw her own reflection kneeling beside the altar, whispering the same words. "Deliver me from those who lie in wait." She woke to the sound of her phone vibrating on the table. "Unknown number," she answered. A voice whispered, "You shouldn't have opened it." The line went dead. She traced the call. The origin was impossible. The number belonged to the phone inside the evidence room at headquarters. By noon, she was back there, ignoring the captain's orders, flashing her badge at anyone who questioned her. The building was half empty, a weekend lull. She went straight to the evidence room. The glass case was intact. The Bible was still inside. But the key to the case, the one only she carried, was missing from her coat. On the table lay another slip of paper. No typewriter this time. Handwritten in careful script. "Confess and be delivered." Lorna felt something give way inside her. The air was too quiet, too heavy. She unlocked the door and stepped back into the hall. Every bulb in the ceiling flickered once, then steadied, casting long shadows that seemed to bend toward her. She thought she heard movement down the corridor, faint dragging footsteps, but when she turned the corner, there was nothing. At her desk, the case files she'd left stacked neatly were now spread open. Every photo, every report, every name scattered like a deck of cards. And in the center, where Monroe's photograph should have been, was another picture, her own face taken from the surveillance footage. Someone had printed it and drawn a thin red circle around her right hand. The one that touched the Bible. That night, she didn't go home. She drove instead to the ruins of St. Mary's again. The police had cleared the site, but yellow tape still flapped in the wind. The smell of smoke had faded, replaced by damp earth. Moonlight poured through the gaps in the roof, silvering the debris. She walked to the spot where the altar had stood. The ground was uneven, scarred. She knelt and brushed her fingers against the ash. It was warm again. Her breath caught as something beneath the surface glimmered faintly. She dug carefully, the soil giving way to reveal a small brass key. It was hers. the evidence key she'd lost. Wrapped around it was a rosary string, burned but intact. She closed her fist around it, the metal biting into her palm. "Why me?" she whispered into the empty church. "What do you want from me?" The air didn't answer, but she thought she heard faint singing. A woman's voice, distant and clear. The same hymn from Rebecca's choir recordings, "Blessed is the one who is cleansed." She froze. The sound came from beneath the floorboards. Slowly, she pried one open. The wood groaned damp and weak. Beneath it, a narrow crawl space stretched into darkness. The song grew louder. Against every instinct, she dropped down, flashlight cutting through dust and cobwebs. The tunnel led to a small brick chamber, maybe part of the church's original foundation. On the far wall, candle stubs lined the stone, melted into patterns of crosses. And on the floor, in perfect alignment, 6 Bibles, all open to the same page, Psalm 51. In the center of the circle lay a 7th one, newer, unburned, her name written inside the cover. She staggered back. The flashlight beam trembled. From the corner, a sound not singing now, but breathing. She turned it toward the noise light falling on a figure crouched against the wall, head bowed. A woman wearing what looked like a choir robe, hands clasped in prayer. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You found the way," she said. "Who are you?" Lorna demanded. The woman raised her head slowly. Her face was pale eyes, hollow lips cracked. "We waited," she said. "He said the detective would come." "Who?" "Father," the woman breathed. "Dale, he's waiting for you to finish." Lorna's stomach turned cold. "Dale Monroe is dead." The woman smiled faintly. "Death isn't the end of faith." The flashlight flickered, then died. Darkness swallowed everything. When she stumbled back into the open air minutes later, she couldn't remember how she got out. Her hands were streaked with soot, her nails packed with dirt. The rosary still tangled around her wrist. The hymn still echoing in her head. Back in her car, she stared at herself in the rearview mirror. Her eyes looked wrong, tired, but deeper somehow, like someone else was behind them. On the seat beside her, the brass key glinted under the dashboard light. She reached for it, turned it over once, and noticed something engraved along the edge. Tiny letters. "DMR." Her fingers went numb. She dropped it, breath stuttering, heart racing. Then she noticed the glove compartment was open. Inside the Bible. The same one from the evidence case. Open again to Psalm 51. She didn't scream. She didn't move. Just sat there as the night pressed in, the sound of rain beginning again, soft and patient. Somewhere faintly a church bell rang. And when she looked down at the page, she saw her reflection in the slick ink, and for the first time, it wasn't her face staring back. It was Monroe's. By morning, the reflection had faded, but the feeling didn't. Lorna drove back to headquarters with the Bible sealed in an evidence bag that now looked like it was sweating condensation, blurring the page where Psalm 51 lay open. Her hands left prints on the plastic. Every mark she made felt like a confession the building would remember. Inside, the station was brighter than she wanted. Sunlight slashed across filing cabinets, turning dust into glitter. It looked like a place where truth could live. But truth had stopped knocking and started picking locks. Captain Royce was waiting with internal affairs. Their suits were crisp, their questions whittled to points. "Chain of custody," one of them said, tapping the form. "You opened the case at 0302 without a second witness." Lorna kept her voice even. The Bible opened itself. A pause. A cough in the hall. A pen rolling to the edge of a legal pad and stopping like it had nowhere better to go. Detective Keene, the other, said gently, "That isn't a statement we can put in a report." She stared at the scuffed toe of her boot until the tile swam. "Then put this in your report," she said. "Someone inside our building is tampering with the evidence, hijacking the cameras, planting messages and photographs. And if you think that's a ghost, you're not listening." They suspended her badge pending review to preserve the integrity of the case. The phrase sounded like the station was a chapel and everyone else was a priest. Royce slid the badge off her desk himself, the metal catching in the light like an eye. "Go home," he said. "Sleep." He added softly, "You don't have to carry this." But the case didn't weigh. It clung. She left the building to a corridor of whispering printers and the long, low sigh of an air vent that wouldn't stop. Outside, the day tasted like tin. She didn't go home. She drove to Mill Creek instead, to the lawn behind the old chapel, where the grass grew in a pattern that looked like the negative of a cross. The woman from the crawlspace had said we waited. That word stuck like a fishbone. Who is we? Who taught them to wait? Property records for Sanctum House loaded on the tablet in her lap. Deeds, halted repairs, utilities paid from a parish account that should have been sealed after the fire. Tucked among the PDFs was a scanned ledger not meant for public view, a list of donors for a benevolent circle tied to St. Mary's outreach. The names were typed, the amounts round and discreet. Near the bottom, older entries were handwritten. D. Monroe appeared 3 times each next to a date that matched the months a woman vanished in the early 90s. There was also G. Mark Father Gideon 2 years later with the notation Respite Fund. And a third set of initials appeared like a not RR. The entry date was 2023. The amount was small, like a test payment. The memo line read, "Simply cleansing." She began to remember every R in her orbit. Reporters, parish volunteers, even a rookie in records. None fit. She scrolled to the donor address and felt the back of her neck tighten. RR used a P.O. box linked to a counseling service run out of St. Mary's Annex before the renovation. The director was a lay minister who'd coordinated grief groups after the fire. His name was Rowan Reese. In photographs, he looked like stone, smoothed by a river, soft eyes, gentle mouth, the kind of face people told secrets to just to see him nod. She drove to the annex, a low brick wing that had survived the blaze by being unimportant enough to save. The door was unlocked. Inside, a coffee maker sat on a folding table like a relic. In the office, pamphlets were stacked by topic grief recovery rites of reconciliation. On the wall hung a flyer for a series called Mercy Through Memory. At the bottom, in small print, Facilitator R. Reese. He was expected to return next week. He was not here now, but someone had been. On the desk lay a spiral notebook open to a page of handwriting that tugged at something in her ribs. Careful, reverent script, the same hand that had written Confess and Be Delivered. The page contained a list of first names: Rebecca, Emily, Claire. Then a blank line, and below it, Detective. A margin note read, Shepherds must go first. She photographed everything, fingers stiff. Her phone vibrated as if it had been waiting for her to notice it was alive. A message appeared from a blocked number Sanctum House. Noon. No police. Bring the book. She checked the clock, 11:17. On the drive, the sun turned high and white and mean, bleaching the fields until every fence post was a bone. She parked under the same sign choked with ivy and listened to the engine tick down. The world was quiet enough to hear her own blood. Inside, the long corridor felt narrower. The circular room waited like a throat. No candle burned. No chair stood in the center. But the air wasn't empty. She sensed a mind in it, a patient one, like someone seated just outside the edge of the light. She set the glass case on the table and unlocked it. She didn't know if she was obeying or baiting. At this point, obedience and bait were twins. The Bible's cover had the nap of old leather warm despite the cool of the room. It opened to Psalm 51 without her help, as if memory had weight. "Thank you for coming," a voice said behind her, low and even like the beginning of a recorded meditation. Lorna turned. Rowan Reese stood in the door, hands visible, eyes almost kind. He wore no collar, just a gray shirt and a small gold cross on a cord. "I hoped it would be you," he said. "He always wanted it to be you." "Who is he?" she said, and her voice had a burr in it. Rowan's eyes flicked to the book. "The man who taught us how to hold sin. He made a mistake with his hands. He tried to wash it by himself. None of us can do that alone." "You're not a priest," Lorna said. He smiled with a sadness that made the room feel like a sanctuary, even as it stank of smoke. "We don't need collars to carry grief." "You killed Claire." He shook his head gently. "I released her." Her hand lifted the gun, found its place as if it needed somewhere to live. "Don't move." Rowan didn't. "Do you know why your fingerprint is on the page?" he asked. "Because someone put it there." "Because you touched the story," he said. Because every deliverance requires a witness. He took one small step, and she raised the gun higher, and he stopped with a nod as if the gesture had been a right. We waited for a sheriff to confess. He did. We waited for his disciple to atone. He tried. We waited for a priest to carry the altar through fire. He failed. Then we waited for someone who didn't belong to us. Someone who lived outside the church's language, who could say no and have it matter. You came. She felt anger flare like a match. You followed me. You planted notes. You put the Bible in my car. We held up a mirror, he said. You brought yourself here. He nodded toward the circle of mirrors blackened with smoke. Look. She didn't. He continued softly. When you look, you'll see the book in your hands. That is enough. You think guilt can be outsourced? She said. That you can pass it like a plate. I think guilt chooses its carriers. What is this Risa therapy group turned cult? He glanced at the ceiling where a char line ringed the plaster like a crown. It's a room where people who lost their girls came to survive the morning. We built a language for pain so that it wouldn't swallow us. But language eats too. One day, a man came and told us we could turn grief into action. He brought us here to practice mercy until mercy became a ritual. It works, Rowan added in a whisper so gentle it chilled. For some. Who was the man? Rowan's eyes didn't waver. Father Gideon. The name hit the room like a dropped chalice. Lorna remembered his empty house, the collar on the dashboard, the note, "Some sins are not forgiven." Where is he now? Rowan looked past her to the Bible, waiting. For me. For anyone brave enough to stop pretending the book is only paper. A small sound shivered the air, footsteps in the hall, then the slow draw of a breath that was too careful to be accidental. Lorna pivoted. The corridor mouth held a shadow. It moved like a prayer, hands pressed together. Father Gideon stepped into sight, hair thinner, eyes bleached by years of looking at holy things. He carried nothing. His mouth formed her name the way a priest forms a sacrament, Detective Keene. She should have felt the click of triumph. Instead, the room leaned edges, softening gravity, shifting until even her gun hand seemed a borrowed thing. You ran, she said. After the fire. I withdrew, he answered, calm as a homily. Sometimes the desert is obedience. You knew about Monroe. You counseled him. You took his money. You moved bodies. Gideon closed his eyes briefly, as if she'd named a saint in error. I carried a sinner to his knees. I failed to keep him there. Lorna laughed once, a dry scrape. And Claire. We asked her not to serve the ritual, Gideon said, and grief finally cracked his voice. But grief loves altars. Rowan spoke behind her, careful not to step. We need you to close the circle. We need a witness who doesn't belong to us. I'm not your witness, she said. You already are, Gideon whispered, looking at her right hand. You touched the page. The mirrors brightened. It wasn't light. It was attention. In the glass, her shape steadied the Bible already in her hands in the reflection, though it sat on the table in the room. She watched her reflected self turn the page. The book in the world stayed still. Her reflected mouth moved, and though she made no sound, she knew the words it formed. Deliver me. Stop it, she said to the men, or the mirrors, or the book. Turn it off. Rowan's voice was almost tender. You can only turn off a thing you turned on. She backed to the table and slammed the case shut. The mirrors went dark as eyelids. Gideon took a breath like a man who'd been underwater and finally surfaced. You think if you seal it, the prayer won't find you, he said gently. But the prayer knows your door now. Then hear mine, she said, and drew cuffs from her belt. The motion steadied her. Rituals that belonged to her, she kept Gideon in her sightline and tossed the spare set to Rowan. Hands. Now. They obeyed. Something in their submission frightened her more than defiance would have. She radioed the county. She expected static. Instead, a dispatcher's voice answered surprisingly normal. Units en route. 10 minutes. The distance between now and 10 minutes felt like a cliff. Tell me about the crawl space woman, she said to Rowan while the seconds crawled. The choir robe. Her name is Alma, he said softly. She came to us after her sister was taken in '93. She needed a shape for her grief. She wears the robe when she prays because it gives her a body. You keep her in a hole under a church. She goes there because that's where her sister's last song is loudest. Lorna felt the air thin. Where is Alma now? Gideon's eyes lifted as if he were listening to a hymn only he could hear. Gone to the cemetery, he said, to speak with a stone. Monroe's grave, Lorna said, and something hot and sour rolled in her gut. Did you tell her to go? No, Gideon said, and for the first time, fear found his face. We asked her not to. Tires hissed on gravel outside. The first cruiser rolled up. Officers took the two men with respectful hands like they were carrying fragile instruments. Rowan didn't look back. Gideon met Lorna's eyes and said, "Be merciful with yourself," and she almost asked him how. When the room emptied, she was alone with the case again. The Bible lay behind glass like a museum piece salvaged from a shipwreck. She should have felt safety settle. Instead, a cold certainty slid into place while she circled sanctuaries someone had gone where she hadn't yet, back to the place where grief slept light. The cemetery road ribboned through her mind like a commandment. She beat the cruiser there by minutes. Dusk fell hard, smearing the stones into rows of hunched shoulders. Monroe's grave was open again, a rectangle cut from earth with a spade's stubborn logic. At its edge, a woman knelt in a choir robe that looked more like a sheet thrown over pain. Alma's hands were outstretched over the whole palms up, as if warming them at a low fire. Her lips moved. Lorna approached, slow, announcing herself without words. Alma's eyes found her like a lighthouse finds wood. "He wants to be clean," she whispered. "He asked me to bring him the book." "No one in that ground is asking for anything," Lorna said. Alma looked past her shoulder. "He's not in the ground." The sentence tilted the night. Lorna edged to the lip and shone her light. No coffin lay below. The hole ended in a tunnel fresh dug, the soil raw and granular, like a throat scraped by shouting. It ran toward the tree line, a dark lung. In the beam, footprints climbed the wall where someone had dragged themselves up and out. A piece of gold cord lay snagged in a root. A priest's cross had been torn from a neck. Her radio crackled with officers 10 seconds too far away. She scanned the tree line. Movement flickered the suggestion of a figure lean and slow and sure. Not Gideon, he was in cuffs. Not Rowan, the gate was wrong. This was older and hungrier. A shape that moved like a question, answered long ago. She went into the tunnel. Soil crowded her shoulders, dirt found her teeth, the flashlight's cone jittered like a candle in a lung. The air grew sweet the way rot grows sweet. She came out beneath the trees into a shallow cut ravined by stormwater. Ahead, fabric flashed white and was gone. She followed. The ground sloped to a culvert where the creek muttered. At the mouth of the pipe, a Bible lay open, pages drinking from the damp. The verse wasn't Psalm 51. It was Isaiah now. "Come now, let us reason together." A voice in the culvert spoke as if it had waited years to be used. Detective. She knew it before she knew it. Not the timbre voices shift under the earth, but the cadence the way repentance can double as instruction. Dale Monroe sounded like a man whose chest was filled with church bells. "Put the gun down," the voice said. "You can't hold a book with both hands while you're aiming." "Dale," she said, and surprise didn't arrive. It had already been here, sleeping in her bones. "You're dead." Silence that felt like a smile. "Death is a locked door," the voice said. "You brought a key." She took one step into the concrete throatlight, flattening the moss into slick suede. "Come out," she said, "or I come in." Water ticked. The voice came closer, but not nearer. "Don't drag me into noon," he said softly. "I only live where the light wears ash." "Where's Alma?" "She's praying," the voice said, so tender it was obscene. "Let her have her prayer." Lorna raised the gun. "You like confessions? Here's one. I am done being your witness." "You can't be done," the voice murmured. "You open the book." She fired into the dark, not at a shape, but at a sentence. The report cracked against concrete and came back as thunder. The water shuddered. The culvert coughed dust. When the echo died, the only sound left was the creek returning to itself. The Bible at the mouth fluttered once and went still on a verse that promised scarlet could be washed white as snow. Behind her, a squad shouted her name. She didn't answer. She didn't look into the culvert again. She reached down, closed the Bible, and felt the leather slick as living skin. When she turned it over, she expected DMR scraped into the back. Instead, there were 3 smaller initials impressed into the damp LEK, her own. Not a brand, an invitation. She stood the book heavy and exact in her hands as if its weight had been fitted to her long before her palms were old enough to carry it. The creek kept its counsel. The trees made cathedral whispers. Somewhere in the cemetery, a bell rang that couldn't possibly exist, a dull iron note that made the night step back 1 pace. On the walk to the cruisers, the officers' faces looked like altars where fear had been freshly laid. Captain Royce arrived breathless, coat unbuttoned, tie ruffed. He'd come fast because underneath his management style, he still had a rookie's lungs. He scanned the tunnel, the culvert, the book. "Tell me what this is," he said, not with anger, but with the ache of a man who cannot bear chaos, unless it is named. Lorna looked at the Bible, then at him, then at the ground that had decided to keep its doorways. "It's the part in the story," she said, voice steady now, "where the witness becomes the altar." And in her pocket, as if it had always been there, her fingers found the brass key, engraved with DMR, warm, ready, patient like sin that had learned how to wait politely at the threshold until someone brave or tired enough turned the handle. The night held its breath and then let it out as chatter on the radio. Units fanned across the cemetery boot, striking gravel flashlights, painting the marble with quick, nervous halos. Captain Royce stood at the edge of the cut earth, the open mouth where the coffin should have been, one hand on his hip, the other shading his eyes as if the dark were too bright to look at. Lorna didn't offer him the book. She held it close against her chest like a rib she couldn't spare. The culvert whispered to itself beyond the trees, patient as the dead. "Perimeter," Royce said, voice jagged, the field commander, trying to remember the catechism that keeps people alive. "Nobody enters the pipe. Nobody goes alone." He looked at her, then a soft break in the hard lines. "Especially not you." She nodded because nodding is easier than a fight. The brass key warmed in her fist, its little engraved letters pressing polite bruises into her skin. DMR, it felt less like an object now and more like a sentence. They ran a camera down the culvert, a small track drone with a fisheye eye and a coil of cable that unspooled like a vein. The monitor on the tailgate of the command truck showed cement and moss and old chew marks where storms had tried to eat the pipe. 30 yards in the tunnel turned the creek narrowed to a dark silver thread, and the feed cleared. Fuzzed again. At 40 yards, the drone's microphone caught a noise that wasn't water and wasn't rodent. A human breath taken through teeth, slow and controlled as if someone were practicing being alive. "Back it out," Royce ordered. The feed jittered, reversed. For a second, something moved past the lens clothing or shadow, or the memory of both, and then the screen went to snow, a white that hissed like boiling. The drone came back in 2 pieces. Cable-chewed camera cracked. Water dripped from it like the last words of a confession. Internal Affairs arrived with their twin clipboards and a stiffness that made the field shiver. They asked for the chain of custody on the book. They asked for her suspension paperwork. They asked for statements. They asked as if asking could hold the world together. Lorna didn't answer. She turned away from their pens and looked at the line of headstones, all the names that never learned how to stop listening. She felt the ritual closing around them, not like a trap, and not like a test, but like a ceremony. You can't stop once the first syllable is spoken. Alma knelt at the grave's lip without moving a lit wick in a room with no candle, her choir robe dragging ash. An officer tried to coax her back. She grew smaller, not by distance, but by will, as if refusing to take up space were a kind of obedience. "He's not in the ground," she said without looking up, and the sentence worked like a key in a lock they hadn't known the cemetery held. Lorna understood what Monroe's voice, whoever owned it, whatever throat it borrowed, wanted. It wanted the book carried where the light wore ash into a place that couldn't be photographed, right where a witness would have to lean forward and put their hand on something none of the forms had a line for. You can't litigate a room like that. You can only survive it, or you make a home there. The thought sharpened her. She put the brass key in her pocket and the Bible beneath her jacket and felt the cold of it through the fabric, the rectangle of a law older than paper. Royce stepped in front of her like a door with a badge. "You're benched," he said, softer than an order, sadder than a plea. "You can't go in." "You brought me here," she said, and the truth in it surprised both of them. "You brought me because you knew I'd hear it if it spoke." "I brought you because I thought you'd stop," he said. "There's a difference." Behind him, the culvert breathed water and something else. Lorna took a step, and he matched it. Then hesitated only a blink, but the hesitation left a crack in the door, and her old academy training slid a boot into it. She moved past him with a nod that meant not a betrayal, just a choice, and the officers parted because rank can push, but hunger can part a sea. Keen Royce said, calling her in the same tone he used the first time he'd sent her to knock on a mother's door. She didn't turn. He adjusted, "Take someone." "That's the point," she answered. "Someone can't go where I'm going." The pipe welcomed her like a throat. The air was cold enough to find bone, the concrete slick, the ceiling low enough to force humility. She kept the beam low, the light a quiet thing, and let the creak guide her. The book under her jacket thumped her sternum with every step like a second heart trying to set a kinder rhythm. Twice she thought she saw a limb in the moss, and twice it was just branches pretending to be warning. At the bend where the drone died, the air warmed as if a mouth had breathed here for a long time. She turned. "Detective," the culvert said. The voice rounded the concrete into a chapel. "Don't bring anger into the sanctuary." "I brought evidence," she said, and the word sounded like a foreign coin, valuable but not accepted here. He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a prayer that lost its way. "You brought the book." "Good. How many other voices have you learned to use?" she asked, and the question steadied her stance more than the wall did. "Monroe, the priest." "The letter's written by a typewriter that's younger than your nostalgia." "Names are doors," he said. "I chose the ones the town would open. Who are you when no one needs you to be God?" Silence. Water coughed, then remembered it was a creek. When he spoke again, he borrowed no one. The voice was ordinary Midwestern, the vowel work of a man who'd been thanked for carrying boxes. "I am the usher," he said. "I show people to their seats." "And the girls?" "They wanted to sit closer to the altar," he said, and she heard the sin under the sentence like teeth under a smile. "You killed them." "I delivered them." She took the book out and let the beam kiss the cover. The leather drank the light. "Come closer," she said. "If you believe in what you did, give it a face." He came closer, but not nearer. He leaned his voice, not his body. "You know that's not how absolution works. Distance is part of the right." She lowered the book until it touched the stream. Cold climbed her wrist. "Here's a new right," she said, and opened it. Water bit the page and backed away as if the creek remembered old vows. The print bled in one corner, washed clean in another. Words like wash and cleanse became echo instead of ink. "You put my initials in it," she said. "You want me to carry your liturgy into every room and ruin it for the correct reasons." "You already do," he said gently. "That's what justice is when we say it out loud." She flipped forward with her thumb. The Bible found Psalm 51 without help, the way trauma finds a house without a map. The page was the same, and not same new dents, new oils, the ghost of a fingerprint where no hand lay. She pressed her index finger to the verse until it hurt. It left nothing. She realized her hands were too clean. The thought made something like laughter huff out of her nose, almost a sob. She dragged 2 fingers through the culvert's wall where algae made a green bruise and then pressed them to the page. This time, a print lived there, imperfect human hers, not a brand, a refusal to be used. "Why me?" she asked the pipe, the water, the usher, the after-image of a sheriff who wanted to be forgiven by a town that didn't know how. "Why does the prayer know my door?" "Because you listen longer than you like," he said. "Because you don't believe in closure. Because when you hear a bell, you count it even if no one asked." "You picked me," she said, and anger came home like a dog that waited in the rain. "You groomed a detective the way you groomed a town." "I set a table," he said calmly. "People sit. You too." She closed the book, and the sound was crisp as a verdict. I'm not your witness, she said. I'm your interruption. The culvert smiled in the absence of light. We'll see. She backed out, measured, not rushed. Running turns a withdrawal into an invitation. The mouth of the pipe framed a slice of cemetery sky bruised and promising. The officers' voices were a far church hum. At the lip, the world widened, and her lungs remembered their width. She climbed careful of mud, and when her boots found grass, the radio bloomed. Contact at the tree line. Move, move. Hands, hands now. She turned in time to see a figure leave the trees the way a page leaves a book, a tear you don't hear until the shape is different. The man wore a work jacket and the calm of someone who expects to be forgiven by posture alone. He lifted empty palms. A gold cross hung at his throat for exactly 1 second before he pinched it off and let it fall like he was done being decorated. Rowan Reese. They pulled him to the ground. He didn't resist. His face didn't even fall into fear. It fell into relief. As if being tackled was a final step in a ceremony he'd rehearsed. Detective, he called, cheek-to-gravel voice, clear. You weren't supposed to bring the book to water without me. Where is Gideon? She asked, walking toward him, the officers making room around her obligation. Where he always is, Rowan said, and the sentence somehow lifted his shoulders against the grass. At the edge of a prayer, deciding if he's brave enough to walk in. You killed Claire, she said, not angry now, just choosing which log to pull to collapse the bridge. I held her, he answered, the first heat in his tone. He asked me to. She asked me to. You can't hold grief with latex. It slithers. Who's in the culvert, Rowan? He blinked slow. A man you already named. Monroe is dead. Rowan smiled with mercy that curdled. Then you know it's not about the man. They walked him to a cruiser. He glanced at Alma as if to nod her back into a body. When she didn't move, he mouthed a word Lorna almost read as Neil. She put him in the car herself, the door's seals exhaling around the truth. Gideon was led from the far row of stones an hour later, found sitting with a shovel in his lap, palms up, the posture of a man who taught others to surrender until it became a habit in his wrists. He didn't look at Rowan. He looked at Lorna, and then at the book in her hands, and then at the ground. Bring it, he said. So soft she could have called it a wind to where the floor is wet. Royce gathered the scene with hand signals and breath, and the anger of a man who has to walk home through a town that reads headlines. IA took notes that wouldn't balance. The medical examiner examined nothing because the dead had been moved into stories again. The drone sat in its cracked shell, the little eye clouded as if ashamed. Back at command, the argument fractured along lines too old to map. Close, it said the ones who needed sleep. Lock it down, said the ones who needed a win. Burn it, whispered the part of the room that still prayed anonymously. Lorna listened until the tide broke into noise, then set the book on the tailgate and opened it to a random page that wasn't random. Isaiah again. Come now. Let us reason together. She laughed once, a sound like a door chain slipping. I'm taking it, she told Royce. He didn't argue out loud. He argued with his jaw. You'll check it back in? He said finally, words arranged like sandbags. When we're done, she said, and the we meant me. He put a finger to the page and left no mark. You'll wear a wire. I'll wear 2, she said, and she would. She would strap one where the ritual couldn't smell it and tuck one where grief couldn't hear it. She would take the brass key and the wrong initials and the right ones, and a recorder older than the lie. She would step where the floor is wet. She would not ask for backup because the liturgy forbids choirs at this part. She would, if she had to set the book in the center of a room that thought it was a church and rename it Evidence. Night shook its head and became later. The cemetery emptied itself of uniforms. The culvert kept its vow. Alma let someone lead her to an ambulance where hands that knew nothing about ritual took her pulse like a prayer you can count. Rowan watched through glass. Gideon watched his shoes, a discipline learned after too many funerals. Lorna walked to her car. The Bible sat on the passenger seat open because wind or will. The brass key in her pocket had learned her shape and felt like it had lived there all along. She closed the door, and the car became a quiet box that smelled like wet leaves and old coffee. She looked at her reflection in the windshield and saw a woman who had learned to listen too long. She put the car in gear. At the first red light, her phone lit without ringing. A new message, no number. Sanctum House, midnight. Bring the book and no other gods. She drove the back roads, the ones without lights where the sky felt close enough to press a fingerprint into. Cornfields shouldered up to the ditch. The steeple of the burned church was a black metronome against the stars. The annex sat low and innocent and empty. Sanctum House waited with its mouth careful and its rooms ready. She parked by the ivy sign, killed the engine, and let the night finish its sentence. When she stepped inside the circular room, breathed her name back to her in a voice not human and not hostile, just patient the way an ocean is patient with rocks. The mirrors were dull. The floor was damp. The table in the center wore the outline of a book, like a tan line. She placed the Bible there and did not take her hand away. She set the recorder beside it and clicked it on. The red light made a little heart. She checked the wire on her chest and the one at her calf. She pressed her palm to the page until heat appeared where ink should. "All right," she said to the room to the culvert that learned to walk to the men who mistook mercy for permission to the town that learned silence as a first language. "I'm here." The door behind her sighed shut on its hinges as if a congregation had stood. The lights didn't go out because there weren't any. The candle that wasn't there found a flame. Somewhere below, water spoke fluent scripture. The air cooled enough to make breath visible. And from the seam where wall met floor, a voice came up like a spring that had waited all summer. Good, it said, and no name attached itself to it. "We can begin." The room took her name and folded it into its breathing until it sounded like a word no one had learned yet. Lorna kept her palm on the open Bible and felt the page warming under her skin as if the paper were a living thing remembering sunlight. The recorder's red eye blinked a steady pulse. The wire under her shirt whispered with the faint hiss of a faraway sea. "We can begin," the voice had said, coming up from the seam where floor met wall like spring water. She didn't answer at first. She let the silence take her shape. Silence is a tool if you hold it right. "You've been beginning for 30 years, she said. Finally, voice low and clean, and the room adjusted to her sound the way a congregation shifts when the right hymn starts. "Tonight we finish." A soft scrape under the boards, not a footstep so much as a heel turning on prayer. The voice returned, careful, almost fond. "Detective finishing is a kind of vanity. We don't end. We molt." "Say your name," she replied, thumb pressing the gutter of Psalm 51 until the skin whitened. "You don't get a ritual if you can't get an ID." The laugh that came back was a thin ribbon thrown down a well. "Names are doors," it quoted itself pleased. "You've opened enough." She slid the brass key from her pocket. The metal was warm as breath, the little letters DMR bright with her sweat. She moved the beam of her flashlight along the wall and found what she knew would be there. A small recessed keyhole cut into a plank that looked like every other plank until someone told you it wasn't. She knelt, put her ear to it, heard water and words, and a pulse that could have been plumbing, or could have been the memory of a heart. "This isn't your door," the voice warned softly. "It's stamped with a dead man's initials," she said. "Everything in this town is my door." She turned the key. Something old released with a tired sigh. The floor shifted a half-inch. An obedient groan, and a round section unfitted itself, a lid lifting on hinges. Cold air rose from a shallow shaft lined with river stone. The smell of the culvert lived here, clean-wrought old hymnals rain that had found a place to stay. A rung ladder, weighted iron, smoothed by the frequent palms of people who mistook descent for devotion. Her wire crackled. A voice popped once, twice, like a man tapping a mic he doesn't trust. "Keen reading you. 2 bars. Where our static braided with the room's breathing pulled the consonants apart and ate the rest." Another channel tried to reach her and drowned. She switched to the calf wire, the one the ritual wasn't supposed to smell. It found a little more air and then surrendered too. The recorder's red dot kept blinking like a patient artery. She clipped it to the Bible's ribbon and slid both into a plastic sleeve she'd brought to keep scripture honest. Down the voice said, friendly as a hotel bellman, "The sanctuary is below." "You stand up," she countered, and knelt to test the first rung anyway. It held. Bring your face to the door like people do when they want to be believed. I am believed, the voice answered, by everyone who needs me. She looked at the mirrors. They were dark, but not unattended. In their murk, she could almost make out her own outline, doubled and doubled again, versions of her standing at other doors in other years, the same guilt arranged with different furniture. She put one foot on the rung, then the other. The descent pressed her shoulders, forced her head to bow. It made her look like prayer, and she hated that. The last step met packed earth. Her flashlight threw a cone into a round chamber edged with brick old mortar, slick with sweating. In the center, a shallow pool lay like a polished coin fed by the slow bleed of the culvert. Around it, 7 low stools, a circle of waiting spines. On each stool sat an object wrapped in cloth the size of a psalter. Take your seat, the voice offered from the dark beyond the pool. I'll stand, she said, beam sweeping. The shadows moved with it in ways shadows shouldn't move, lagging, thinking, deciding. She pulled back the cloth from the nearest bundle. A Bible? Yes. Another cloth, a framed photograph face down. She turned it. Rebecca eyes laughing at something just off camera. Next stool, Emily's nursing pin on velvet. Next, Claire's volunteer lanyard melted at the clip. Tokens softened by handling, made into sacraments by grief. You made a museum, she said. You called it church. We made an altar out of refusal, the voice said. No one else would hold them this close. She kept moving. On the last stool sat a spiral notebook, pages damp ink soldiering on. Rows of first names written patiently. The list she'd seen upstairs, but longer, older. A blank line waited beneath them, like a mouth waiting for a spoon. Under the line, a neat new entry, detective. The ink had a wet shine. I'm not a relic, she said. No, the voice agreed. You're a right? She turned the flashlight full into the far wall. It caught a figure. Not a silhouette. A man. He stood half inside a recess, as if the brick had grown around him like a tree swallowing a fence. He wore no collar, no badge, no jacket, just a dark shirt that had learned to keep quiet. His hair was the sort that belongs to a photo from 1991, stubborn, practical. His face was every face in Mill Creek that had learned to look away at the right time and consider that wisdom. He raised his hands at shoulder-height, palms forward like a man fending off rain. You're not Monroe, she said, relief and disappointment shaking hands inside her chest. He smiled with an ache that didn't ask to be noticed. I tell his story the way the choir tells a psalm. Different voices, same melody. Name, she repeated. I have carried many, he said, and that phrase was true, in a way that made the hair on her arms lift. Once I answered to Russell Raines. I mowed the church lawn. I fixed the furnace. I drove the van for the funeral luncheons. I learned everyone's door codes and how the alarm liked to be coaxed. I learned where to put a shoulder and where to ask nicely. I learned how to hold crying men and how to take a confession that wasn't mine and set it carefully on a shelf with the others. RR, she said, the ledger line clicking into place. Cleansing. He nodded. A tiny payment so the account would remember me. And the girls. I held them before anyone else did. He said simply. I told them the prayer would make sense when the air ran out. I told them that to be close to God sometimes meant being very far from a door. He tilted his head, studying her hands. You have good hands. Clean. That's rare here. She kept the gun steady, the muzzle a small black idea. Step out where I can see both feet. He obliged, slow, making no sound priestly without a priest. In the light, his eyes were the color of pew wood, where 1,000 palms had polished it. I wanted them to be found, he said. A ritual that doesn't end in discovery is a hobby. You put the Bible beside Rebecca under her own house, she said. I gave you a page you could carry, he said. The sheriff gave me the first lesson. Guilt is an engine if you feed it gently. The priest gave me a language for packaging it. I gave you a door. You killed them, she said again, because the room had begun to make verbs bend and somebody had to keep one straight. He sighed, honest as a man after a hard day. When they needed it, he answered. When the prayer required a weight to hold it down. Put your hands behind your head, she said, and he did, fingers interlaced like a man resting in a pew. She moved the beam, keeping his face her shoulder, bumping the pool's rim. Water lipped stone and settled. "Turn," she said. He turned. The recess was deeper than it looked. Behind him, a low passage ran under the wall toward a smaller chamber. A breeze came from it with the careful temperature of breath. The air smelled like lilies that had learned to attend funerals. "Down there," he said quietly, "is where he waits when he wants to try another voice. You'll find no bones. We do not leave what's holy where rain can step on it." The wire at her calf hissed alive for a second, the faintest syllable. "Nah," then folded. She pictured Captain Royce hunched over a graying signal jaw a lever. She pictured Alma in the ambulance mouthing a song whose words changed each time she got to the chorus. She pictured Gideon and Rowan in separate rooms making the same shape with their hands, absent-minded as men who have been taught to ask mercy of the air. "Walk," she said, slow, toward the passage. He obeyed, steps respectful, like entering a sanctuary after the first reading. She kept a yard between them and the gun on his shoulder blades, and the book tucked in the plastic sleeve against her ribs, too warm now, like it had a fever. The passage narrowed brick, knit tight by years of hands pressing it for balance. The next chamber was a throat's pocket, small, round the ceiling low enough to make the tall kneel. Candles in makeshift sconces guttered without flame, a trick of draught. Items lined a shallow niche, a child's drawing, a wedding program, a paper flower crisped brown, a coin polished by thumbs. On the far wall, word cut deep, "Deliver me." Beneath, shallower, newer, "Begin with the detective." She felt something in her sternum answer like a door knocking back. Her voice found itself. "Russell Raines, you're under arrest for the murders of Rebecca Holloway, Emily Rourke, Claire Donnelly, and any other victim we tie to this ritual you've been curating. You won't find what you need to feed a jury," he said almost kindly. "You will find what you need to shut the door." He moved then, not at her, but toward the words, lifting his hands off his head to lay his palms on the carved sentence, like a man who loves a wall. She stepped closer to drag his wrists down, and he pivoted just enough to meet her eyes, and, for one heartbeat, she saw a boy sweeping a church when he was 14, pleased with the sound dust makes when it stops being itself. And then his expression emptied not of intent, but of outcome, as if what he planned had already happened, and he was simply remembering it. A click underfoot, a plate giving. The floor lurched a fraction. She swayed, caught the niche with her free hand, and the book slipped from under her arm and slid across the short distance into the pool in the first chamber, with a sound so soft it might have been a sigh. She lunged back fast, faster than the ritual expected. The plastic sleeve bobbed rude. The ripple hovered. She grabbed at water up to her wrist, the cold and honest cut, and lifted it, dripping into light. The page had bled around the edges, but the verse stood stubborn as a bruise. The recorder still blinked. Russell watched, curious, like a man at a zoo glass. "See," he said softly, "you carry it correctly." "Hands," she repeated, and this time he obeyed without a sermon. She cuffed him, the click of the ratchet a small metal amen. She tugged him back toward the ladder, each step a negotiation with a room that hadn't agreed to let them go. At the shaft, air came down like help. She sent him up first, one cuffed wrist on the rung, the other obedient at his lower back. At the lip, she shoved him into the circle of mirrors and felt the floor decide to forgive her weight for now. Above, the walls had gone brighter without light. She could feel the room listening through its teeth. She hauled him into the center breath hard, and for the first time since the door had breathed her name, she shouted, "Police on me." Her voice cracked the ritual's tone like glass thin from prayer. Boots answered. A hallway found men. The door shoved itself open like a reluctant penitent. Royce entered first, a drawn gun that did not shake eyes wide with the relief that comes when the room you feared would eat someone burps them back. 2 uniforms in his wake, then the thin men with legal pads late to their own relevance. Hands, Royce barked on reflex, then saw the cuffs and altered to good. His gaze flicked to the book dripping on the table, and held one extra heartbeat as if the leather might flinch. "You all right?" he asked her, and the question had a private grammar. Standing, she said. The wire on her calf delivered a single clean syllable, "copy," and died again spent. Royce took Russell without ceremony and with a gentleness that infuriated Lorna, because gentleness had been weaponized down here for years. As they moved to the door, Russell turned his head just enough to address her without breaking the rules of being arrested. "You'll come back," he said, not smug, not pleading. Endings itch. She didn't answer him. She wiped the sleeve with her sleeve and set the Bible on the table, open to a blank between books. The page looked like a field waiting for snow. In the mirror to her left, her reflection stood exactly where she stood, but her reflected hand didn't touch the book. It hovered. Her reflected mouth moved. She did not hear the words and did not need to. She stepped sideways out of her own echo until the mirror had to choose a version and chose the one in front of it. Outside, night had softened at the edges. Sirens made polite circles and then settled. Gideon stood beside a cruiser, hands cuffed in front, now a concession to old bones. Rowan sat inside another forehead on glass, as if learning how cold felt. Alma stood under an elm with a blanket-like liturgy around her. She looked at Lorna with eyes that had learned too much and didn't blink. "Did he ask you to read?" Alma whispered when she came near. "He asked me to carry," Lorna said. "And will you?" Alma asked, not hopeful and not afraid, just someone who wanted to know how to plan tomorrow's breathing. Lorna looked down at the book, at the water still weeping from the sleeve, at the faint impression of her prints dried like fog on a window. She remembered the culvert's voice, and Monroe's tape, and the crawl space that smelled like a choir that had fallen asleep but not stopped singing. She remembered the first report from 1991, the neat note about a candle lavender, a Bible left open on a table like an instruction manual for sorrow. "I'll carry it to a room with light and locks and no liturgy," she said, "and then I'll put it on a shelf and write a label under it that says what it is. Evidence." Alma nodded, almost a bow. "Sometimes altar is evidence," she murmured. "And sometimes evidence is how you tear an altar down," Lorna said. Royce came up, thumb on his belt face, a study in ongoing arguments with God. "We got him," he said, half to her and half to himself, as if the sentence could teach his bones a new posture. "If we're lucky, we got him." "We didn't get the idea," she said. "We never do," he answered. "We just get the man." He glanced at the book. "You checking that in?" "In the morning," she said, and the morning felt like an ocean away. They cleared the house. The last officer out flicked his light off, and the room exhaled. Lorna waited at the threshold. The mirrors held nothing now but the dark's honest shape. The table looked like furniture again. She put the brass key on the wood next to the leather, the two metals not touching, and felt the smallest tilt of victory. The key unlocked nothing she needed anymore. She closed the door gently behind her. The latch clicked like the end of a word. On the walk to her car, her phone buzzed once in her pocket. No number. A message composed of 5 words she had already learned by heart. "One more, and you're clean." She looked back at the annex, the burned steeple, the cemetery's shoulder behind it, all the culvert invisible, but competent. "Not your math," she said to the night. "Not anymore." When she slid behind the wheel, the recorder's red light still beat like a steady fact. She clicked it off, then on again, and spoke for the tape, for the chain of custody, for the thing in her that needed sentences to be nails. Detective Lorna Elise Keene, Sanctum House, 0058. Suspect Russell Raines in custody without incident. Secondary subjects: Gideon Mark and Rowan Reese detained. Evidence Bible recovered with active interference. Unknown party claims. She stopped. Let the air finish that line. Unknown party silenced, she said instead, and pressed. Stop, a small mercy she allowed herself. The engine turned. The road unrolled. The night followed like a dog that had decided not to bite yet. The book on the seat beside her didn't move, but the idea of it did, shifting weight, finding the shape of the next door. She felt it and refused it in the same breath. Tomorrow, she would label Enter Seal Testify. Tonight, she drove with the windows cracked so the town could let itself out of her lungs. She took the long way past the culvert just to hear the creek say something ordinary. It did. It said, water. It said, stone. It said the smallest sound the world makes when it keeps going. And under that thin as thread and twice as strong, she heard a bell. Not a church bell, a desk bell. The kind an usher taps when it's time for your row to stand. Morning looked like a rehearsal for forgiveness, pale and undecided. Lorna parked behind the courthouse, the Bible sealed in its new case like a storm inside glass, and carried it through a hallway that had been trained to receive evidence without flinching. The clerk on duty nodded as if nodding were a sacrament. Labels waited. Forms waited. A chain of custody forms sat blank, a small clean field asking to be written on. She signed where the arrows told her to sign and said the words out loud as she wrote them, because naming a thing while your pen touches it is the oldest way to make it real. Evidence. Book recovered from Sanctum House substructure. Prior interference suspected. Prints present including mine intentional. She let that last word stand like a fence post. Internal Affairs showed up with coffee and fatigue. They asked for the recorder. She handed it over without ceremony. They asked if she'd reviewed the audio. She hadn't. You don't play prayers on speakers if you can help it. The tech slid the card into a reader and hit the spacebar. The room filled with the scrape of hinges, a breath that could have been plumbing, the whisper of her boots in the shaft, her own voice like someone else's. Then the man in the recess spoke ordinary as a deacon asking who needs a ride home. Russell Raines said his name without saying it, admitted, without confessing, described, without weeping. The sound felt smaller in daylight and more dangerous. Monsters shrink at noon, but their ideas don't. A prosecutor stepped in, the kind who keeps pens like scalpels. We'll need sworn statements from everyone, she said. And we'll need the priest separated from the counselor before their stories braid. She looked at the case number like a weather forecast. We proceed on homicide and conspiracy. The ritual language is color. Lorna didn't argue. It's not a courtroom's job to translate liturgy. It's a courtroom's job to measure where blood went and why. Captain Royce stood in the doorway with a face like the first hour after a funeral. The one where you realize there's still a sink full of dishes. Sleep keen, he said, but softer, as if the order might bruise. He added, you did good, and said it the way a man says grace surprised he believes it. She didn't go home immediately. She drove to Mill Creek Cemetery with the brass key in her pocket and let the morning wind tell her where to stop. Alma sat on a bench with a paper cup of tea she wasn't drinking blanket folded neatly beside her, as if a blanket could be taught to behave. When she looked up, her eyes had learned some ease. A nurse from the night shift had braided her hair back with the competence of someone who has taken care of strangers for years. Is it over? Alma asked. Not hopeful, not resigned, just a person who needed to plan lunch. It's ending, Lorna said, and the tense fit. In court, not in rooms. Alma nodded like a liturgy she could keep. Does the book stay with you? In a vault, Lorna said. Under fluorescent lights, on a shelf, labeled. Alma smiled, small and unsteady. Shelves are nice. They walked to the row where the grass was still wrong and stopped. The maintenance crew had filled the cut with fresh dirt, pressed it flat with the back of a shovel, as if smoothing a bed. The cross on Monroe's stone cast a short, honest shadow. Lorna took the brass key out, weighed it in her palm, felt its warmth yield to morning. It had unlocked exactly one door and tried to teach her to love the sound. She closed her fist around it, then opened her hand over the creek until metal touched water and vanished with a sound like a thought finishing. Back in town, the news did what news does. Illinois cold case cemetery culvert linked to new suspect. Church counselor charged in ritual killings. Ex-priest denies role. Grace misused, he says. Comment threads braided blame and prayer until no one could tell which was which. People left flowers in front of the burned church, and then someone left a wrench because the furnace had been the start of everything for Russell, and then someone else left a choir program and a small battery-powered candle that flickered without needing anyone to watch it. Gideon asked for a lawyer, then asked for a Bible, then returned the Bible unopened, Rowan gave a statement that slid between motive and mercy like a fish that refuses to be declared dinner. He did not claim innocence, but he tried to graft his intent onto the town's grieved heart. The prosecutor listened with the face of a woman who has seen intent dressed as charity before and knows where to sow. Raines did not weep. He answered questions with the calm of a man who has practiced small courtesies so long he could iron his own soul flat. Did you move bodies? I carried what no one else would. Did you select victims? The prayer selected. Did you write notes? Language needed a shepherd. The words sat in the air like moths, soft and wrong. When they asked about the fingerprints on the Bible, he tilted his head as if listening to a memory. Fingerprints are how a story decides who belongs to it, he said. She belongs. He meant Lorna and did not bother to soften it. They arraigned him anyway. They Miranda'd him in a voice that had no interest in poetry. He signed the form. His bail hearing smelled like paper and camera lenses. Outside church bells tried to ring noon into submission and failed charmingly. After 2 hours of statements and the gray ache of forms, Lorna walked to the evidence vault with the clerk. They slid the case onto its assigned shelf. The label sat below it like a quiet verdict. Holloway Case Bible, 1991, recovered St. Mary's Annex/Sanctum House, 2025. Mixed prints. C file. The clerk shut the steel door, spun the dial, tugged to test the seal, and wrote the time in a ledger that predated every computer in the building because some locks still prefer a pen. You sure you're okay? The clerk asked. I'm sure I'll keep going, she said, which is what okay sounds like in a building made of forms. Sleep took her then in a motel off Route 6 because home felt like a place the ritual had borrowed. She woke to the TV talking to itself about weather and football and a missing dog with one blue eye. For a minute, she didn't know where she was, and the ceiling answered in that low way. Ceilings answer, you're between. It's safe to be between. She showered heat out of her skin and watched ash and creek and old rooms run off her wrists. The water left the tub clean, which felt like a small undeserved miracle, the only kind anyone gets. By afternoon, she was back at the station writing the narrative report the way you place stones in a river to make stepping places for whoever comes after you. She kept adjectives out where she could. She put dates where rumor preferred fog. She attached photographs of the shaft, the chamber, the stools with their softened relics, the niche where someone had carved prayers into brick until letters learned to live there. She wrote the sentence she'd promised herself she would write, the fingerprint on the Bible that cracked the 1991 mystery belongs to a man who learned to be needed and to a town that learned to be forgiven by proxy. She took the poetry out of it and left it as this: the latent print recovered in 1991 matches Sheriff Dale Monroe. The matching print recovered in 2025 on the same artifact matches the undersigned and other parties per lab report 402B. She let both truths stand next to each other until they made a shape that felt like responsible weather. Royce came by with a paper cup and a question lodged behind his teeth. He didn't spit it out. He asked instead about her badge. The suspension would be lifted pending the review board. It was the department's way of confessing it had needed to punish someone and had run out of suitable targets. She nodded. He set the badge on her desk, metal face-up number catching light, and left the room like a man willing to be wrong in front of God and paperwork. Near sunset, Alma appeared at the station door in borrowed clothes, hair still braided like a promise. She had a small paper bag in her hands with something wrapped in a dish towel. I didn't want to keep it, she said. Inside lay a candle stub that had survived the church fire by hiding in a hymnal's gutter. You should put it on a shelf. Some shelves take fire out of things, Lorna said. Good work for a shelf. She wrote a quick intake, gave the candle a number, and watched how the town's ghosts behaved when someone counted them properly. They behaved better. Not perfect, not gone. Better. At dusk, she drove one last time to Sanctum House. The door hung open, not as an invitation now, but as an object that had lost the habit of closing. The circular room had the tired look of a stage after the actors have gone home. The floor scuffed, where meaning had tried to grow the air ordinary again, and a little embarrassed. She walked the perimeter, counted the mirrors, touched the wall where the hinge of the hidden door had warmed to her hand the night before. In the center, a faint rectangle remained, where the Bible had set the wood a shade lighter. Sunlight from a high, cracked window fell across it like a benediction the room did not deserve. Her phone buzzed once. No number. The last message returned to itself on the screen like a coin trick. "One more, and you're clean." She looked at the words a long time and understood finally the arithmetic. There had always been one more, another woman, another town, another room that knew how to whisper through walls, another detective who would rather listen than turn the radio up. The math was designed to never finish. That's how rituals survive modernity. They pretend to be a task list. She typed back for the first time. Math changed. She hit send and waited for the little delivered confirmation that never came because the number wasn't a number and the room wasn't a room. Then she powered the phone down, not in anger and not in fear, but in the slow, sturdy way you close a book when you've gotten what you came for and refuse the chapter the author wrote to trap your appetite. On the way out, she paused at the threshold. The air smelled like damp plaster and old flowers, and the brief metallic sweetness of a cut that has decided to heal. She spoke to the room because sometimes that's how you speak to yourself without sounding foolish. "Your evidence," she said, "not alter." The room didn't answer. Rooms don't once they lose their choir. In court, a month later, the town sat in its best clothes. The prosecutor spoke in a voice that fit the room. Raines listened with the meek attention of a man performing the discipline of meekness. Gideon testified that grief had been weaponized and that he had not known the weapon until it fired. The jury learned to look at an old man with both suspicion and mercy in the same breath, which is a talent people should be taught early. Rowan tried to explain the difference between holding and harming and discovered there isn't one when the person you're holding stops breathing. Alma came in a dark dress and said her sister's name and then said it again, and then said it a third time for the record, and the third time sounded like a bell rung by a hand that will not tire. When the Bible appeared, the bailiff handled it with latex and respect. The judge allowed the jury to see the labels that seal the page open to Psalm 51, with fingerprints like moons pressed into a night that kept its stars. A murmur moved across the benches the way wind moves across wheat. Lorna watched it feel less like a charm and more like evidence, with every second the fluorescent lights held it. That was the point. Bring it into a room where no one is allowed to whisper. After the verdict, Raines looked at her as the deputies led him past and gave the smallest nod the kind men reserve for a stranger who has just helped them lift a couch. He seemed grateful, which made her dislike him more cleanly. Gideon lowered his eyes. Rowan stared at the cross on the wall like it owed him an apology, and Alma breathed in a way that made the day sound like a day again. Outside, the sky had the blue of a file folder. Reporters arranged microphones like flowers. Lorna didn't speak to them. She walked to the car with the quiet of a person who has finished carrying something heavy and refuses to pick it up again just because the world is watching. That night, she went home for the first time in too long. The apartment smelled like wood and dust and a plant she had not watered, and that had forgiven her anyway. On the table, her badge lay where she had left it number catching light from the street. She set it on the counter and poured water into a glass and drank the whole thing because sometimes absolution is just hydration. She sat by the window and listened to a neighbor's radio whisper a ball game that didn't matter, and a train passed somewhere working on its own ritual. The town breathed. So did she. Before sleep, she wrote one last note for the file that no one had asked for and that every case deserves. What broke the story was not a miracle. It was a fingerprint on a page and the decision to treat a page like a room everyone could enter. The town will keep its ghosts, but they will have to stand in the light now, where names get spelled and doors get labeled. If there is one more, there will always be one more, and we will count them. Not because counting saves, but because counting refuses the lie that a ritual is the same as truth. She stopped, put down the pen. left the sentence without a period on purpose as a reminder that endings are choices. When she turned off the lamp, the window held her reflection and did not borrow anyone else's face. In the silence, a memory rose the culvert's mutter, the sanctuary's breath, the murmur the Bible made when it slipped into water and learned how to float. She let the sounds pass through and out. She slept without dreams for the first time since the door in the floor taught her how to bow. Morning came untheatrical and sufficient. She woke, made coffee, watered the plant again just in case, clipped her badge to her belt, and stepped into a town that would never be finished and would not pretend to be. On her desk at the station, the evidence ledger lay open to yesterday's date, desiring nothing more than the next time. She signed where a small arrow asked closed the book and smiled at the sound. It was only paper. It was enough.